Good evening and welcome to the May 16th and 2012 meeting of the City Council. I would like to introduce our guests tonight, Councilmember Sammy Bateman, Councilmember Joe Ingstrom, Councilmember Jacob Ingstrom, and my name is Mayor Brian Garrett. Tonight, the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Councilmember Joey Ingstrom. We will now proceed to item 1A of our agenda, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda. Please note that speaking in front of an audience can make people nervous, so please no boos or cat calls while anyone is speaking. Our first speaker is David Young.
Up front. Green button at the base.
Good evening, council members, staff. I would like to just talk to you tonight about tuk-tuks. A couple of you may be familiar with that. I'm just here to follow up. I've met with Toby and his staff a couple times, and I want to update you on some exciting things that have happened since I've had a chance to meet with Toby, and also just familiarize you folks with what I'm here to talk about, and also extend the opportunity to talk with you further and give a presentation about tuk-tuks. And first of all, what's happened is we've rolled out some amazing veterans programs nationwide. What we'd like to do is, first of all, let me explain what the caveat and what I'm here to talk about in West Sac and the coordination is. Tuk-tuks are a form of transportation. They're amazing. They're used all over the world, but the ones we're bringing to California and specifically to West Sacramento for the first kickoff program in the nation they're all electrical vehicles. They're zero emissions, and they cost $1 to charge, and they go up to 150 miles on each charge. And so they're just amazing, amazing opportunities to meet many of the electrical mandates and the emission mandates we have, as well as provide amazing, we believe it's going to fix and truly make the last mile link in transit in neighborhood and inner city traffic possible with these amazing vehicles. So what we've done is we've rolled out a veterans program for welcoming back those in service and also those that are in existing veterans, and they would fit under a different program to kick off their own type of franchise, or also an LLC to give them availability to have an earning income, develop their own company, and instead of having maybe to rely on a source through the public or something else, they could provide and come together as a collective unit and really provide a great transportation source to help us all. And so with a little bit more time, some of the economic and tax benefits from these are just incredible. For each person that gets in a tuk-tuk, it would be 8.25%. And for every tuk-tuks that we bring into California, into America, it's going to provide 14 jobs just for administrative and support. And we think that California is just amazingly set for these outside of, they're in Bangkok, Beijing, India, Mumbai, all the most populated cities in the world, and they truly are the last link to mass transit in all those cities, and they don't work without it. I was a consultant for many, many years all over California. I left the U.S. Department of Energy 2 months ago, and I know I'm winding down here, but I really believe in these. I'd love to work with West Sacramento as a pilot program. We can do assembly opportunities in the future on the port, because obviously we're closer to here than Tennessee, and that's where there'd be assembly now. And real quick, my cafe down on 3rd Street, I'm opening up the old Subway in about 2.5 weeks, and I'm going to have coffee, organic coffee. And so I'm really here to stay in West Sacramento. We're going to have pastries, and I really believe in the waterfront. So if you folks would like me to come back and give a presentation on the tuk-tuks, and they're going to be here in about 3 weeks, so we can do a staff day and really kick them off, and we can see them in the flesh. And if you'd be interested in working further with me, I'd love to coordinate with you. Okay?
Thank you. Next reader, Bill Lowell. Loud.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell of West Sacramento. For the record, I was going to say maybe we need some redevelopment monies for some new chairs so that we can all raise up a little bit so those of us sitting down can see all of your little heads. But no, my main purpose for tonight, I just wanted to remind those who didn't get their voter pamphlet. Our new assemblyman is Roger Dickinson, whose office is over in the 900 block of L Street in Sacramento, so right across from the UPS office. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our presentations under item 1A. And I want to again thank and acknowledge the young people in our community today who are participating in a mayor and council for the day activity. All day long, the city has been governed by a council of young men under the age of 13. You probably haven't noticed. There's no difference. But they've had the opportunity today of spending time at the fire department, at the police department, at the community center here at City Hall, and now tonight as part of this meeting, as part of a charity auction item to support one of our local schools. And so again, it's and they're going to sit with us for just a few more of the agenda items and make one of the presentations along with us. But Mr. Ledesma was part of the day as well. Did you want to make any comments about the council members? Okay. All right, and let me also note that the council did meet in the Successor Agency Board met in closed session to confer with our legal counsel on approval to initiate or intervene in an action, and no action was taken. Item 1C is appointments to boards and commissions. We're not making those this evening. Item 2 is presentation of a proclamation honoring the San Pedro Association on the occasion of its 90th anniversary. Is there a motion to approve? Second. It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Christoph. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. The proclamation is adopted. We're going to ask Councilmember Johannesson, along with his colleague, Councilmember Sammy Bateman, to go to the podium and make the presentation on behalf of the city. Back to me.
To present this proclamation to the San Pedro Association. For those in the audience who haven't been to West Sacramento for all their lives, actually the Portuguese community was here before all of our lives from the early 1900s and has really been an integral part of the creation of what is now West Sacramento, and particularly the Bright neighborhood. So with this proclamation, whereas in the early 1900s, the first Portuguese immigrants from Madeira Islands, Portugal, settled in what was known as Riverbank Township, then Bright, now West Sacramento, and whereas this small group paved the way for other Madeiran families to settle in the area, bringing with them culture and religious traditions. And whereas in 1922, a young Catholic priest, Reverend Father João Jardim, arrived from Madeira Island, visiting Madeiran families and relatives requesting donations for a monument be built on the island and dedicated to world peace. And whereas from that first festa in June 1922, beneath oak trees, began the tradition of the San Pedro Annual Festival, which continues to this day. And whereas generations of the West Sacramento residents, as well as those of our surrounding communities, have participated in the religious processions and festivities at San Pedro Park. And whereas in June 2011, the California Senate and Assembly joined to declare the month of June a month of celebrating Portuguese national heritage. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of West Sacramento does hereby extend to the San Pedro Association their sincere congratulations, past achievements, maintaining its cultural traditions, and upon its 90th anniversary celebration on June 24th, 2012. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members, and staff. Bom dia. I'm Larry Freitas, San Pedro Association President, and with me is Kathy Ingram Kelly, our Vice President. We are here to accept the proclamation on behalf of our association, and with that, over 120 family and individual memberships, not only in the local West Sacramento area, but throughout this country and even the world. We have members all throughout. A lot has changed since 1922, and San Pedro Association continues to support the local community. We provide a place for events for our members, and not only that, for the local community, with many people in the local Bright area using that facility. We're now in our third generation of leadership, and our mission continues to be the same, honoring our Madeiran heritage, customs, families, and our patron, St. Peter. And on behalf of names from the past, you know, the Ramuses, the Pintos, the Freitas, Carvalhos, Silvas, Vietas, Sequeiras, and Carvalhos, and Paulos, and Neves, Rodriguez, Gonzalez, Fonseca, Perry's. There's a lot of names here from the past. And on behalf of those people, thank you so much for the 90th anniversary proclamation. And as I said in Portuguese, and my accent is horrible, muito obrigado. Thank you.
Oh, yes, this would be the time. Yeah, and he does have a card to speak. Thanks. No.
Oops. Well, thank you. I want to add the West Sacramento Historical Society's congratulations to this 90th anniversary celebration, and also to make the council and the city at large and the community even in a larger sense aware that in the month of June during their celebration, we're going to be installing a display honoring the San Pedro Association and its history and its contributions to the West Sacramento stories and journeys in our history gallery in the new community center. So that's going to be coming on. I believe it's scheduled to come in around the middle of June. Hopefully it'll be there. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's going to be there by the day they have their grand festival. So we want to welcome everyone to come to the festival, drop by the history gallery. We have interactive displays there, and you'll see some slideshows that'll be up on our website, westsachistoricalsociety.org. So again, thank you very much, San Pedro, and it speaks to what volunteerism really truly is. 90 years of it, just imagine. And I invite all of you to be volunteers as well. So thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, and I want to make a quick comment and thank the San Pedro Association for their work. It's really helped, obviously, from the historical point of view. You've been in this community for such a long time and shaped the lives of so many people, including one very special person to me, my wife, Maria Simas, who was I think a princess at one of those, a queen at one of your festas years ago, and her face is turning red because her picture will probably be up in the gallery. But I know the work, having been around it now since I've been with my wife, you do great work, and it's much appreciated by the community. So thank you.
Just a quick
Christoph.
comment, if I may. I can remember as just a little guy. I lived in Bright, and we used to go to the San Pedro Festival. The whole weekend that it was there, I remember the barbecue on the spits and all of those, you know, the fine foods and things that we sort of miss today. I mean, it's some of that still is not carried on, but at the same time, it was an event that the whole community just really looked forward to, and the parade used to go up and down the different little streets, and I think my sister was a queen or a princess also, but it just goes back to show that there's so much heritage here in West Sacramento that those were very good times, and hopefully we can get back to those grand plans that those founding fathers did. And one of the major facilities there is a chapel. They have a beautiful little chapel. If you haven't ever seen it, it's really worth going over and taking a look at. Taking a tour, of course, with the San Pedro people. But so something to do.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to return next to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there reports or other communications this evening? Mr. Johannesson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item on May 9th, the exploratory committee of the Community Choice Aggregation met, and this meeting was the next step in looking at whether or not this is an option that the Yolo County wants to buy into. Again, it's a way that you can set up an organization that basically provides clean, green power to the citizenry. And it's actually, you can do anything from operating a utility to contracting it out. But in general, what it does is it uses existing transmission lines. But this event was a little bit different. We had some the community stakeholder folks at the meeting to get them involved with the kind of the planning, which including Tony Turkovich and Paul Mueller from, looks like that's Yolo County, Dan Ramos and Grant Deary from our area, Lloyd Ramsey, Peter Davison from Winters, and Bill Julian and Eugene Wilson from Davis. And so some of the questions that came up was, you're actually creating an organization that competes with, in this case, we would compete with PG&E, and what is the expertise to be able to create a government entity that would compete with a, established utility, and what do you do when there's price volatility, and how do you be competitive? So there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. There's also the issue of whether or not this is even that necessary now, because right now there's no requirement that the cities do this, although there is some activity in lawsuits against EIRs that say that this might be a good precaution. So anyway, that's again, it's one of the exploratory committee meetings on that. The Yolo County Housing Authority met. Really the most significant item was to review and accept the audit for housing. And there was one approval of $329,000 to complete an acquisition of one of the properties that is basically 40 units that would house 120 people. And finally, the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation met on April 26th. Some of the significant issues that were discussed there was Delta Lane and the Jamboree development that would be a potential partner in that project. The West Sac Housing Development Corporation president is going to be interviewing, or not interviewing, but meeting with the Jamboree folks to see if there's a fit there and see what type of, basically framing an agreement for that, and then it would, of course, come back to council for action. And aside from that, we had just general updates on the occupancy, and finally, more progress on our providing solar to some of the projects, and that's it.
Mr. Christoph.
Yes, on May 10th, the West Sacramento, it's a JPA between the city of West Sacramento, RD 900 and RD 537. A couple significant items on our agenda were the consideration of a contract for Mark Thomas and Company for surveying. There were, I think, 14 or 15 different proposals that came in, or bids that came in. Staff had knocked it down to 9, and then staff further knocked it down to 4, and then they chose one. Well, one of the things that I thought should be appropriate, and that would be, I wanted to know what the bids were on each one of those, from each one of those 4 companies. And they did not have that in our staff report, so I've asked to have it brought back next month. And so we'll be considering that. The other one was our group chose the preferred design alternative for levee segment F as a setback levee, and the setback levee would be the preferred alternative for that particular segment. As you remember, we have A through G and F and B seem to be, or it's not seem, but are the controversial ones. They're the ones that have residents living in those. And so we're taking our time and we're trying to do as much analysis as we possibly can. And segment F, like I said earlier, was the setback levy was the preferred alternative. It's the one that gives us the most protection. Quite frankly, it's the cheapest. But I don't think it's the cost that's really driving that, but it really gives us the most protection. In a couple of months, I think in July, we'll look at segment B. And segment B contains the vast majority of the homes that are in question. So that'll be, it's an emotional issue. Some people are going to lose their homes. And, there are a number of reasons, but flood protection is the city's #1 priority for a whole lot of reasons. Not one of them being FEMA, and the other is the protecting of, the 50,000 people or 40,000 people that live here. And so we have some very, very difficult decisions to make, and it'll be a very emotional time. Thank you.
Mr. Christoph, Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Yeah, just real briefly, Mr. Mayor, I know we typically try to at least capture the essence of trips that we take. So I know at least yourself, me, and Mr. Ledesma went to the annual Cap to Cap trip. I think we participated on flood and transportation committees, respectively. I think all of us did. Good meetings. We had different meetings, but I think as good as they could go, it's always hard to tell exactly how well they went until time has passed. But I know we had an opportunity to meet with Congresswoman Matsui on some of the legislation that she's proposed. We had good meetings with FEMA. So our staff did a wonderful job of preparing for those meetings. I know there's some other meetings that take place or visits that occur earlier in the year, and so they teed it up nicely for us. It was reaffirming some of our consultants, or many of our consultants that we have working on the flood work in our community really are the leads with many of the committee meetings that take place. So it was good to know that we have the right people in the right place. And we also had a unique opportunity to have dinner with Senator Feinstein, in which I think the mayor had to admit that he accidentally took her notes, and so luckily he was sitting close enough where she could have grabbed him around the neck, but she didn't. She was kind and
Grab me around the shoulder.
Around the shoulder, that's what it was. It looked like she was going to grab you around the neck when you admitted that you actually took her notes, her speaking notes off of the dais, but she was kind. But it was a unique opportunity to have somebody in her position hear directly from us about some of the issues that we have here in our community. So it was a good meeting overall, unless you guys want to add anything to it.
Yeah, thank you, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I also attended the Cap to Cap meetings at the end of last month, and I will also give kudos to our staff for teeing up some great meetings we had on both the flood control issue, the port issue. I participated, the Cap to Cap trip has several teams that talk about certain issues that affect us all, and I took part in the Transportation Committee. So we were able to also meet with Congresswoman Matsui and others regarding transportation projects for the region. But we were able to talk about the streetcar system that we're trying to implement with the city of Sacramento, as well as with on our attempt to deepen the port deep water channel. And so on that front, we were able to make some progress, make sure those issues stayed front and center. We also had the benefit of meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers on our flood control issues. And I must say, I'm in total agreement with Mayor Pro Tem Villegas that our staff and the folks that work with us, our partners, do a tremendous job of telling our story. It was, we were welcomed in those meetings. The road was well paved when we got there, so it certainly helped. So it was very worthwhile to have that time to present the story for our residents, but also get a chance to meet with folks from the region. And we had a lot of opportunities to meet with other electeds and other leaders in the region that I think will ultimately benefit us in the future. So that's all I had.
I'll just add, I think we attended some of the same meetings, but I did participate in conversations with the Corps. I believe, Mr. Ledesma, you were at the Pentagon Office of the Corps at some point. I met with the Civil Works folks at the Corps, with Senator Feinstein, with the White House. I was at the White House to meet with the President's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs about the Section 104 crediting for the levee projects in particular, but also some other trade and commerce issues with respect to the port. And then at the White House the following day to meet with OMB, Mr. Panos and I with OMB about the same issues, essentially around moving those projects both forward. And those were West Sacramento specific meetings. I understand that Mr. Panos and I accidentally caused the OMB Deputy Director in charge of water projects to not meet with anyone else in the region and only meet with West Sac. But it was a good session, and I think in both the White House and in follow-up conversations with the White House subsequent to that, the recognition that as I believe that the White House director said, what they're doing is crazy. At the Assistant Secretary of the Army's office with respect to Section 104, and so we're just looking for the right opportunities to connect all these pieces together. And then I had the opportunity to lead the cap-to-cap meetings with Congresswoman Matsui and with Congressman Thompson around these issues, and then we met both with the Federal Transit Administrator directly, the head of the FTA, plus Congressman Blumenauer, who's the lead streetcar advocate in Congress around our streetcar project. So it was a very productive trip, both on the cap-to-cap score and on our own city priorities. We have such a broad range of city needs at the federal government in flood protection, in transit, and in the port. That there's a million moving parts at any one time, but definitely the message was quite clear, and other cities in the region that were there were a bit astonished at how much legwork had been done by West Sacramento on these issues compared to what other jurisdictions have been able to accomplish. I also wanted to acknowledge the West Sac Chamber, who sent a sizable delegation as well. I think there were 3 representatives of the leadership of the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, and it was very important for our federal representatives to see the partnership between the public and private sectors here and the impact on economic development and trade and commerce and the national goal for improving our exports, to have business there with us talking about the importance of the port and flood protection and other priorities as well. But it was I think very helpful and important. So, yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
Yeah, just one other report I wanted to share with the council. The Yolo County Transportation District met Monday, and pretty light agenda, but the one thing that I wanted to make sure the council was aware, and that is, as you know, the state budget issues continue, and one of the things that appears imminent for the district, the school district that is the idea, the further deeper cuts into the bus transportation system that gets most of our kids to and from school. It is getting increasingly difficult for them. So the district and the school district and the transportation district are meeting tomorrow, I think, to discuss if there's anything that can be done, because it appears that the district is going to get out of that business very soon. And so, so Terry's agreed to at least meet with them to figure out if there's anything that can be done. I mean, I don't know how we can absorb it into the budget. It's completely different from what the transportation district traditionally does with its bus service. But in any case, you know, getting kids to and from school is getting very, very expensive and difficult for our district with deeper cuts. So more to be heard on that as it progresses.
Yeah, we've explored this once before, and I think one of the issues, the key issue to overcome is the state law with respect to the use of these buses. So, you know, if even a 6th grader gets on a YOLO bus and goes to Southport Elementary or to Westmore Oaks or to any school on their own initiative, it's no problem. It's fine. The bus can transport them. But if the school designates the YOLO bus as a means of transportation, then the YOLO bus has to meet all of the school bus standards, which are actually not higher than they are for YOLO bus. They're just different. And so but as the state is withdrawing, I think the governor's latest proposal is to keep all the money for school bus transportation, but not require that it be used for school buses anymore. So the district could make the choice on its own. But if the state's not going to provide direct financial support, then maybe it could get out of the way and let local schools make a decision that YOLO bus, especially because we're running empty bus, not empty, but half-empty buses that could accommodate students, that there might be a solution to be had. So I think it's, in addition to get the two districts, that getting our legislative delegation involved might be helpful too. So, did you have any other, Mr. Ledesma, besides Captain Cap? And then when I report to SACOG, in our capacity as the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways Board of Directors met earlier in the month. And the SAFE, which is the acronym for that board, oversees, or originally came into being to oversee the call boxes, which are on the freeways and highways, that are supported by a small vehicle registration fee supplement of a couple of cents. We, over time, it should be of no surprise to the council, I've been pushing that this is an outdated way of dealing with road problems. So people have cell phones, and we've also developed the Freeway Service Patrol. So rather than waiting for you to call, we just have service vehicles constantly on the freeway because they're always finding somebody. The net result of all of this is that call box use has been declining steadily over the last several years. We're now down in Yolo County to each call box gets an average of 1 call every 3 months. So it's a fairly expensive infrastructure to maintain and operate for a very low volume of calls. And so we're working on a new plan for the SAFE that I think envisions us closing some of the call boxes and creating other alternatives for motorists to be able to use that recognize that virtually all motorists have other forms of technology. And in fact, most of the calls that we're getting now at the call boxes are, do you know where Cal Expo is? Right? They're directional calls as much as maintenance calls, and many of the maintenance calls are calls that we would catch anyway, because while you're at the call box, our Freeway Service Patrol vehicle is already within a few blocks of you, naturally just driving by. And so thinking about how to modernize this and make this a more efficient system is a priority. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's not pennies either. And so could we use those resources to be more effective in terms of serving motorists and keeping traffic moving, which is the point, right? It's not just that, it's not a substitute for AAA. It's that if there's a car stuck in the road, that slows everybody down. And so we want to use the resources to try to reduce that as the maximum extent possible. All right, so Mr. Ledesma, we're gonna allow you to say a few words and then excuse our guests for the evening.
I will.
Because although it is a great honor to serve on the city council, after 40 minutes, it becomes a child protective services issue.
I think it was that way at about 12:40 today. But yes, I want to thank our young members of our council and our mayor today for spending the day with the mayor and I and learning about other parts of our city and the services we provide. I'll ask one of them to name, well, let me tell you a little bit about our agenda. We spent a great deal of time today touring the city at the fire department, thanks to the folks, our fire department and the folks over at Station 45.
That's Chief Terrell in the back.
Yeah, thank you. And our police department as well, Chief Drummond and all the staff and for hosting us today. And then our Parks and Recs department, I'm not sure if Connie's here, but for giving a tour of the community center. And of course, Chris Rankin for setting it all up today. She was terrific and it was a great experience. But we did spend a little bit of time. There was a nerd alert at about 2:30 today when we gave them a quick civics lesson on our city government. So I'm going to give them a quick quiz, if you'll indulge me, and ask our council members, junior council members, what parts of our city did they learn about today they didn't know before. So maybe Jacob Engstrom, do you have an answer? What part did you learn today? Did you learn a different part of our city, that a service for our city?
We learned that the city council helps the fire department and police department.
And what other departments did we learn about today? Or what other areas do we help service? Anybody else? Does Brian have an answer?
Sewer and water treatment plant.
Very good. So they did listen, Mr. Mayor. Sammy, do you have any other?
Public Works.
Very good. And Joey Engstrom, did you have anything to add that you learned today?
I learned how the water works and the sidewalks and streets, how they all work, and how they help with the taxes to make bigger streets.
That's right. So, very good. I'm glad you all listened and you learned something today. And I think the staff was proud to have you today, and looked like they had a lot of fun as well. So, thank you guys very much for your taking part in our meeting today too. So, hopefully you learned something. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll now dismiss our junior council members for the evening.
I
Yes,
think in the very near future, some of these people will be sitting up here.
like in an hour from now.
Maybe give it to them.
Yeah, that's the whole agenda for tonight, so it would be a good souvenir. Those were all family members? I thought they were protesters. See you here again. All right, then returning to our regular agenda item, the consent agenda, which is items 3, 4, and 5. Are there any items on consent that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or discussion? Mr. Johannesson?
Number 3, Mr. Mayor.
All right, item 3 is consideration of approval of plan specifications and contract award for the Police Department Integrated Access Control and IP Video Surveillance Security Management System. Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, Drew, on this particular item, you know, one of the concerns I have is, you know, I don't see any West Sacramento companies that have responded to the bid.
The firm that is selected is a West Sacramento office of
Siemens?
Siemens International, yes.
Where do they have an office?
They're over on Industrial. They have an office right here in West Sac.
Okay. I guess what I'd like to see in these things as they come up, just, you know, to what extent there's been any responses. And I'm kind of concerned about why there may not be responses for others. I know we've got 1 or 2 other security firms in the area. And so my concern is that if we're writing these requests for proposals, that, you know, maybe limiting and to the extent that we might be able to review the specifications. You know, I'm not sure exactly if that would be the case here, but I would just want to caution to make sure we're not sending out RFPs that are so specific that we target organizations that aren't West Sacramento and don't really give West Sacramento companies a fair shot at these things. Because this is a significant contract.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And we worked very hard to come up with a system that would meet the police department's expectations and requirements. And the firm that's selected is very qualified to handle this, and we were happy to have a West Sacramento office propose on it.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I'm very supportive of this, and actually, I want to revisit, not on this item, but I do want to revisit our approach on local preferences, which I have been supportive of, but as you know, as you think it through more and watch what, for example, Sacramento County is adopting a local preference ordinance as well. If everybody in the region adopts a strictly local preference ordinance, the losers are those communities that house businesses, right? We have a lot of more businesses than per capita or per square inch than Sacramento County does. They buy a lot more than we buy. If everyone's only buying in their local communities, then businesses in places like El Grove that don't have hardly any businesses but are building stuff win a lot, and businesses in communities like ours lose. It's bad economics, and so we just need to be very careful. If everyone else is doing it, we have to do it too, but we should be careful about it, and I think move more towards a regional bid preferences, for the same reason that NorCal Beverage, which is here, it's a West Sacramento company. The vast majority of its employees are residents of Sacramento. And there are plenty of companies in Sacramento which employ a large number of West Sacramentans, and we want them to do well. We want them to make payroll, to pay Christmas bonuses and support the families in our community. And so I think we just need a more sophisticated approach. This is not on you, Drew, but I'm really speaking to the city manager and to my colleagues. I think we need a more nuanced and sophisticated approach in the region around the whole notion of what local preferences really mean, because I think we're starting a war, unintentionally in the region, of which we can only be a loser, given the density of business that we have here.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments on consent? All right. It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Kristoff. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Item 6 is a Neighborhood Stabilization Program public hearing to consider adoption of NSP 3 guidelines and amendments to NSP 1 guidelines.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We are requesting this evening that the council open a public hearing and receive comments on proposed amendments to our existing NSP 1 program guidelines and adoption of our NSP 3 program guidelines. After receiving comments, staff is recommending that the proposed amendments to the guidelines be approved, as well as the adoption to the new NSP 3 guidelines. Since the adoption of the NSP guidelines in 2009, HUD and HCD have released several clarifications and made some changes to the original NSP requirements. The proposed amendments to the NSP guidelines reflect some of those changes and clarifications so that we can continue the operation of our NSP 1 program. In addition, as the council may recall, on February of this year, the council authorized an application to the State Department of Housing for additional NSP 3 funding, which was subsequently approved. The NSP 3 program funding will continue to promote the recovery of our neighborhoods by acquiring, rehabilitating, and reselling vacant and foreclosed homes to eligible households. In addition, some of the NSP 3 funding will be used for acquisition, rehab, and rental of single-family homes, which was an HCD requirement for the NSP 3 funding. The proposed set of new guidelines will be again used to operate the rental and resale of the NSP-assisted homes. The amendments to the NSP guidelines and the new NSP 3 guidelines were presented to the Housing Advisory Commission at its May 14th meeting. The Commission recommended the approval of the amendments and the adoption of the new NSP 3 guidelines with no additional changes. I'd be glad to answer any questions that council may have.
Are there any questions of staff at this time? All right, seeing none, then we're going to open the public hearing on item 6. And we do have one request to speak on this item by Mr. Lowell. It was.
I don't think it, no.
Oh.
Testing, okay. Again, William Lowell, West Sacramento, for the record. As you know, I'm beginning that stage where I use a walker sometimes, but the house I have has steep steps in the front, and this group called Rebuilding America or whatever that's located across the river, they told me that they couldn't change my steps to a ramp until my health got such to where I was in a wheelchair. But yet on my walker, it says do not use on stairs. And I believe your presenter told me over the phone that the city could help me, but he didn't have money for this fiscal year, so maybe I could put in an application or be instructed as to when to put in an application to have my stairs converted to a ramp. And because I don't think it's right that I have to take the walker up and down the stairs when there's a sticker on the walker that was given to me by Kaiser Hospital, and it says, "Do not use on stairs." So, like I say, I appreciate some feedback on that, maybe later. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, that's the only request we have in the public hearing, so we're going to close the hearing on item 6. Mr. Huerta?
I'd be more than glad to follow up with Mr. Lowell on any future funding for any assistance to the ramp.
But those sorts of improvements are not eligible
Not under the
for
NSP
the
program,
NSP
no.
Correct.
I guess one of the questions I had, I think that when we heard this a few months ago or something similar to this, I would really like to see, instead of rental housing, like to see the home ownership component of this really pushed. And because I think that there are some real long-term benefits when it's ownership rather than rental. And I realize that the rental market is the hot market now. It's the hot market. But at the same time, these homes will be, I think, affordable enough so that people can qualify for that.
All right, other comments? Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. Good evening, Raul. So one of the other conversation that we had, and I can't recall exactly where we left it, but we had a conversation about the program, the home buyer assistance program, and the guidelines to the extent that we could include or require that the purchaser have a reasonable down. I think there was some conversation, help me with exactly where it ended up, but I know there was some conversation about the program not requiring any down or almost providing a down for some of the units. Is that still in this proposal, or was that something separate?
It is still part of this proposal, and that's primarily because we have to meet the NSP affordability requirements. So we do have to provide some type of assistance in order to meet those requirements.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to continue to bring that up to the extent that we're able, because I just don't know if it's the right. I mean, we had some conversation about making sure that if you're coming to the plate, or if you're coming up, if you're interested in buying a home in West Sacramento, you need to bring some skin in the game. Put some skin in the game. Because I don't know if we're as effective in promoting the policy of homeownership if someone doesn't really bring anything to the table, so to speak. And I would just encourage staff to continue to explore ways to, find some balance between what our policy is and what our goals are, and how do we straddle that with what I know the state is requiring, which is that we provide that assistance. Just continue to keep it on the radar. So.
Correct, and both our first-time homebuyer guidelines and our NSP guidelines do require that homeowners provide at least 3% of their own funds for down payment.
Great, thank you.
All right, if there's no further discussion, is there a motion? Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carries. Item 7 is a public hearing to consider objections to the proposed removal of weeds per Council Resolution 12-22, declaring weeds growing on a certain lots a public nuisance. Chief Edgar.
Testing. Okay. Good evening, Mayor, Council. On April 4th, council meeting, you adopted Resolution 12-11, beginning the weed abatement program. On that night, we set tonight to open a public hearing to allow the citizens to object. It is respectfully recommended that the City Council open the public hearing to receive objections to the weed abatement program by the property owners.
All right, are there any questions at this time? Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, maybe just a quick one. So what is is there a height limit on the weed issue?
When they get abated on the large lots, it gets turned into the soil. If it has to be done by hand, it's usually about 2 to 3 inches.
Right,
down.
but I mean the, when is a lot overgrown? When is it considered? My concern is there's actually, off of South River Road in Jefferson, there's actually a port piece of property that has very tall weeds on it. And, you know, I want to make sure we're taking care of our own weeds.
No, I've been working with Rick Toff on the port property. Some of the property that the port has, our own contractor does for the port. So there's some that when our contractor comes in, he'll do the port at the same time. May 20th, this Sunday, is the last that property owners have to do it. So when it's city property that kind of works with our contractor, that kind of gets done a little bit after June. But we'll go back out between May 20th and June 1st to see what lots haven't been done. But, so that's the process. It basically any lot that hasn't been knocked down are the ones that we'll be doing.
Great, all right, thank you.
So the port's treated like any other governmental entity?
What was that?
The port and its properties are treated like any other governmental entity, or?
Well, the port is, you know, a lot of the port actually has grain on it. They've got a lot of different programs going on, and a lot of sheep are doing some of it. But there's some sections of that that we'll be doing, or the city's contractor will be doing for the port.
On behalf of the port, okay. All right, Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Eric. So, so I know in the past we also talked about the possibility of looking at some of the traditional violators year after year. I mean, it's almost cheaper for them to not do anything with it and let the city do the work and then just roll the cost onto the tax rolls. Have we looked at some of the history to see whether or not certain violators are? I mean, we ought to bump up the cost of doing that. I mean, I know we're not in the business to continue to do the work and mowing people's properties, but I just wondered if we've done anything different, or are we just is it easier to just keep doing what we're doing?
Yeah, we do have an administrative fee added on to make it a little bit more unattractive for us to do it, but we haven't looked at the ones that we constantly do every year.
Well, it would seem to me, I mean, I don't know how much you can continue to push it, but it just seems like if we're going to do it and not raise the fee or not cause them any grief beyond what they've determined as a reasonable cost of not doing business, it would seem to me we would want to explore that, because I don't know if we want to be in the business of just knowing, okay, this parcel, every year we know we have to do it, and we do it and we roll it on. I mean, I'm assuming we're collecting enough that's worth our while to do it. I mean, I don't expect that we want to be in the business.
Yeah, no, the cost of having it abated is covered, and then plus, like I said, there is an administrative fee that we add on top of that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right, then with that, we're going to open up the public hearing on item 7. We have no request to speak on this item, but is there anyone that wishes to address the council? Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing on item 7. Return it to the council for further discussion or for a motion.
Move the item.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Ledesma. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 8, it's consideration of municipal service review and sphere of influence for the Davis Cemetery District and possible annexation of the city of West Sacramento.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're asking you tonight to provide comment on the draft municipal services review and sphere of influence study that was completed by LAFCO, and to possibly support the future annexation of West Sacramento into the Davis Public Cemetery District. The Davis Public Cemetery District is one of 6 public cemetery districts in Yolo County, and of the 6, West Sacramento was not part of any of them. So the Davis Public Cemetery District is looking to expand its boundaries. It has capacity to serve more people for burials and other internment options. The municipal services review and sphere of influence study are precursors to the process for annexation. What is being proposed by the members of the Cemetery District Board is that if annexation was to occur, that there'd be different zones that would be set up. And so West Sacramento would not be subject to the property tax assessment that the current members of the cemetery district pay, but the zone where West Sacramento would be in and other parts of the county that are also proposed for annexation would have higher fees being that they're not part of the district. So the action tonight is really for the council to comment on anything that is in the sphere of influence or the municipal services review, and to provide your support or non-support of a possible annexation effort. The study has been presented to the LAFCO board one time, and it was sent back for further study because the city of Woodland wanted to consider possible inclusion of their city public cemetery district within this annexation also. We have 3 members of the Davis Public Cemetery District here who would be happy to comment or provide any information for you if you so desire. Be happy to answer any questions for you.
Mr. Johannesson?
And just a couple. If this annexation occurs, does that affect the constitution of the commission?
Well, the Board of Trustees, the Board of Supervisors appoints the Board of Trustees. I don't believe they would be changing the number of people on the Board of Trustees. That's not, I don't believe that was a consideration. But the Board of Supervisors does make those appointments, and they are for 4-year terms. So there would be a possibility for someone from West Sacramento to serve as one of the Board of Trustees.
All right. And I guess the only other issue is I'm looking at the annexation map, and at some point Davis is going to be a minor component of that. Is now the time to talk about the name of the organization to be more generic in the event of an annexation?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would think that might occur during the annexation process, but I don't know for sure.
Carol, just the staging here. So this results in a sphere of influence change, right? Not a. What would the annexation time frame look like? All I saw in here was a recommendation that we be added to their SOI. Is it more than that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Would you repeat the question?
I thought the recommendation here is the recommendation in their report at least was that the sphere of influence be expanded.
Correct.
Not an annexation.
That's correct. But these actions are precursors to a possible consideration of an annexation, and this would be the opportunity for the council to at least give some preliminary comment as to whether or not they would like to, pursue the possibility of annexation. You don't have to comment on that right now, but these are actions that are precursors to an annexation.
But within a sphere of influence, the district would have no authority to impose its taxes.
Correct.
And we would have no rationale for being on the district's, for having representation on the district's governing board either.
Not until there's annexation.
And
right.
Does the sphere of influence affect the requirements for, or the limitations on the number of non-resident burials?
No. Right now, they do have the legislation that allows for 500 non-resident burials. Mm-hmm. And so that would, that's already in effect.
Right, and the sphere of influence doesn't put any more people in one category or the other.
No.
So the only consequence of the sphere of influence is as a precursor to annexation.
That's correct.
It does not itself do anything at all.
It sets forth their planning area for the next 10 and 20 years.
I see. And do you know what the tax rate is now? Or is that on one of the pages of the?
You know, I don't. Maybe one of the
Yeah, I
members of
didn't
the
see it in
district
the-
does.
It's on the
It wasn't in the report.
I saw the fees, but I didn't see the tax rate.
Yeah, there's a fee structure in the report, but the tax rate isn't in there.
Yeah, unless the revenues, but it doesn't really break down what the
Yeah.
rate might be.
And then, do you know, does a cemetery district have the power of eminent domain?
That I don't know either.
I would want to know that.
Okay, okay.
And then separately, whether or not a cemetery district has any exemptions or do the full force of our zoning laws apply to a cemetery district in ways that they do not apply to school districts, for example? Are there any constraints on the city's ability to impose zoning restrictions on cemetery districts? Or like a school district, could they purchase a piece of property, hold it in fee title, and determine that it will be a cemetery regardless of how it fits our general plan?
Okay.
We will certainly want to look at that, but I don't believe they would. The rules that apply to school districts allow them to override local zoning. I believe that's limited to school districts, but we'll look at that.
Mr. Kristoff?
Yeah, Carol, one question I'd like to see, or at least explore a little bit, and that is, for the property tax assessment, this does not affect any property tax assessment on the property tax bills that come to West Sacramento. But after they go through annexation, I just want to make sure that there is a vote or something required by West Sacramento in order to put a tax on the tax rolls.
That's correct. That's is the law right now. There would have to be a
Okay.
vote if you were going to be putting something on the tax roll. That's why the district is proposing to have separate zones. So those areas that are non property tax
Right.
assessed would likely pay higher fees because they're not paying
That's right.
the property tax.
Wait, so I'm sorry, could you clarify? So I thought originally that it was that the district had signaled it did not intend to impose the property tax. Would it have the independent authority if it changed its mind to do so, or is a vote of the people required under Prop 218 or some other mechanism?
A vote would be required.
Of the whole, of the vote of the
Yes.
living residents of.
Yes.
So-
If
Mr.
I may,
Ledesma?
thank you. You know, I guess one of the and I appreciate all the prior questions, and certainly those are things I'm interested in as well, but it has a little bit to do with just not being clear on what the district would provide by way of service for our community, or what, as morbid as it sounds, what's the demand for having us being in the Yolo County district. Mayor Pro Tem Villegas just whispered to me, and I thought the same thing. I've never been to a funeral, except if it was, you know, they listen here, that the nearest, closest cemeteries in Woodland and in Winters and David. I'm just trying to get a sense of what,
Well,
how would this
it
be
would simply
serviced?
provide another option for West Sacramento residents that they currently don't have. There's it's primarily restricted to people who live in the cemetery district now, which is primarily the city of Davis. And the Davis Cemetery District has some unique burial options, like a green burial and other options that you could have, some cultural services that could be offered there also. So it would simply be another burial or internment option for West Sacramento residents.
Is it typical for a community our size to have those types of options? I mean, that's kind of the question I'm getting at. I mean, that's just, I know it's, the rest of the county does. I'm just trying to think out if we don't, are we an anomaly among municipalities our size?
I don't know if we're an anomaly or not. It's just an option that the citizens here would have that they don't currently have.
Well,
Just in my experience, it's relatively common for longstanding communities going back a bit of time, even if they're much smaller than ours, to have cemeteries. Because we were in the unincorporated area, there was nothing happening. But you can see most of the rest of the county, even small places like Winters, have cemetery districts.
Probably can't have a cemetery here because of our water table. So, I mean, that, unless you went to some kind of unique kind of a cemetery, then, you know, but.
That might be an issue.
I mean, it's not that we're gonna have a cemetery here, it's just that it gives the residents an opportunity. There may be some folks that wanna be buried at Davis that this allows for. They will pay a higher price than, we'll say, somebody that belongs to the cemetery district now, but because they pay property taxes on that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, that there's a 218 election or some kind of election that is necessary so that people have the option of, if they want to join this and pay for it, well, then they can. Or they can pay a sales tax and we can pave the roads a little better. So there's always something we can do with the money.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't one of, it's not the first I've heard of it, although I didn't hear about this until it already had gone to LAFCO, so, which is a separate problem, about the timing in which we were approached kind of after the fact about an annexation of ourselves. But it's not an issue I've ever heard. I've never had a single person in the community ever say, you know, I can't, you know, the options for me are too limited, or I can't get into the Davis district. With last year's Yamada legislation, you know, I don't know if that 500 limit is, you know, close to being met, and, you know, so that this really provides a new option, or whether we're just, you know, we're doing advanced planning, which is not inappropriate. I mean, we don't need to be waiting until the district is at 497 and say, quick, we need to annex. That's not effective either. So I'm not arguing against it. I don't know anything about the market essentially for what we're doing, for, you know, for the options and choices that we have today, and maybe it's just because I'm the last few months with redevelopment, and, you know, there's just any new taxing entity in the city, even with the theoretical taxing authority, I would just want to be very, you know, I'm careful about. That's all. So I'm you know, I'm leaning towards it. I want to be sure we know what we need to. So, Mr. Ledesma.
Well, yeah, and I agree, and I guess, you know, the orientation for me on this is it does provide an option, and just knowing, like you said, no one's ever come to me and said, you know, we have a lack of service here, and that's why I'm asking this question. In fact, most of the folks I know, unfortunately, who have passed, are buried on the other side of the river, and so I'm not saying that we look into that entity as a possible option, but I don't know if we have any. That's just my experience, and most people I know in West Sacramento that have passed go there. And so is it worth their time and dollars and the risk of all these other, you know, having another tax identity on top of them when their natural inclination is to, if they naturally gravitate to the services on the other side of the river? Again, it's just something to keep in mind on this.
Just one other, because is the cemetery district a full service provider? Although we don't have a cemetery, we do have funeral homes and other pre-burial providers in our own community. Is the cemetery district in any way compete with those, provide similar sorts of services that compete with our own local providers?
No, I don't believe so. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to point out that Councilmember Kristoff is now on the LAFCO.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to report the mayor's selection committee. The mayor's selection committee did, under item 1B, the mayor's selection committee did meet 2 weeks ago, and we did unanimously appoint Bill Kristoff to a 2-year term on as the voting representative of the cities of Yolo County on LAFCO.
And so he will be there to protect the city's interests as this moves forward, if it moves forward.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
Yeah, it sounds like, so this is part of a larger shared service, I mean, or is it the shared services conversation, or is it completely independent?
No,
Okay. So
it's not
different.
part of this, really
Okay.
part of the shared services. It represents the spirit of the shared services. It was really proceeded on a separate track,
Okay.
different track.
Yeah, I don't have any major heartburn, I don't think. I mean, as long as we have some way to ensure, well, get answers to some of my colleagues' questions earlier. I mean, I think options are good. I certainly don't want to incur any additional costs, and I'm with the mayor. Anybody that has the potential to, any special district or any new district that has the potential to cause us any further grief than we've already received this evening, I'm not interested in. But I think, I mean, it makes sense. Little clunky the way it came before. I mean, it seems like it'd come to us in a workshop or some different conversation before. But I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got concerns about it, but they're not deeply held, and I'm perfectly comfortable deferring to Mr. Christoph's judgment when it comes to LAFCO. I want to acknowledge Supervisor Rexroad, who was the one that flagged it and said, hey, West Sac City Council, are you aware that we're being asked to vote, to cast a final vote right now on sphere of influence to add you to a district that you may or may not be aware of at all? And so appreciate the heads up from our new junior supervisor. So.
I will need to feather out with you a little bit about what's your concern of power of eminent domain.
All right. Okay, if this is, no actions required, that was for comment only. And thanks for coming and providing all that deep background. Appreciate it. Item 9 is consideration of the Community Investment Action Plan.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Tonight, we're here to present the Community Investment Action Plan, which is the culmination of several months' worth of work by the City Council, the Pro West Sac Committee, and staff from every city department. Community investment is essentially what we've always done here to achieve the progress we've seen in the city over the past 25 years. It's where the council's strategic vision and dedication of resources meet infrastructure and economic development, and with the results being new investment, more revenue for city services, and enhanced quality of life for residents. In the past, we used the tools of redevelopment to make investments in infrastructure within key areas of the city, but as we know, redevelopment is gone, and at the same time, revenue's down. So like any other city, we're facing challenges of trying to keep going what we've always done, but doing it with less. And the difference with our city is that we have some unique advantages to address those challenges, and a can-do attitude that has been instilled by our leaders here. So that's what brings us to today. We started back in September when the mayor formed the Pro West Sac Committee, chaired by Councilmember Ledesma, and that group of local leaders gave their recommendations on the post-redevelopment environment and told us that a variety of new tools will be needed to continue community investment, and they pointed us in the right direction on how to get there. We then formed a group of city staff to focus on this issue and come up with a plan to implement a cohesive set of tools and approaches to put the city on track to being able to continue strategic investments in infrastructure to support the type of desirable development and create the environment that attracts new investment to the city. And that's what the Community Investment Action Plan is all about. I want to leave plenty of time on this item for questions and discussion. So the rest of the presentation is going to be focused on part 2 of the plan, which recommends the implementation of about a dozen items. And there's a lot of information there that we could cover. We do have 20 recommendations associated with those items, but I plan to focus on the ones that we prioritize as most important for moving the new program forward. Okay, well, maybe I can just, well, we'll keep going as get that worked out. The community investment paradigm, here we go, has 3 components, and we've included a chart on page 8 of the plan that demonstrates a model for how these components would work in unison to achieve the desired outcomes. First and foremost is funding for infrastructure. And ideally, that's revenue that can be bonded against to leverage grants and private investment. Secondly, we have real estate tools to efficiently acquire and dispose of property, and will be more really important to assembling development sites as we go forward. And third, the program needs dedicated staff support and funding sources to carry out core activities related to infrastructure, economic development, and real estate. Okay, so let's get to the specific implementation actions of what we're recommending. This is just, I'm going to say forget the PowerPoint. The next slide. Okay. Infrastructure financing districts, and beginning on page 9 in the plan, there's a very detailed description of what IFDs are, what they can and can't do, what area of the cities it could cover, or what area of the city it could cover, and then a summary of the various legislative changes that are being considered during the current session to make IFDs more effective, including a proposal of our own. But basically, the reason we're giving IFDs so much attention in the plan and recommending taking steps to form one is because of the potential they offer for a dedicated, reliable, and bondable source of revenue for infrastructure. Also, by utilizing only the city's portion of tax increment, they don't touch the shares of the other taxing entities, and they don't add any new tax to property owners. The big caveat to our enthusiasm about IFDs is, of course, that we really need that simple legislative change to move forward with forming our ideal district, although the outlook on that is looking positive in the current legislative session. So we've made 6 recommendations having to do with further analysis and planning related to the formation of an IFD.
Laurel, these are sort of like P-bids?
They're not, well, a P-bid is actually a new tax on property, and a P-bid also has specific restrictions on what the money can be used for. They're generally used for maintenance and simple streetscape kind of things. An IFD is different in that it's more like redevelopment tax increment in that you form a district, collect property tax from that district as property tax increment, and recycle that tax to do infrastructure for the benefit of the district. So it's not a new tax, and that's the main difference.
So will the state give us an extra 1/3?
I'm sorry, if you...
State, will it give us an extra 1/3 of that property tax?
No, the state, all that we would be able to do is collect tax off of our share. So, you know, we're projecting anywhere from 40 to 48% of the money coming to the city is our share of the property tax, and we would be able to collect tax increment off of that portion.
Okay.
Next, like many other cities, we looked at the potential of what a community development corporation could bring to the table for the city. The CDC model varies a lot in form and function, but we've really looked at 2 benefits of a CDC. The first is accessing new markets tax credits, which represents the potential for millions of dollars in private equity investment. It's a very complicated process, but the mere potential is worth exploring. You do need to have a nonprofit entity to qualify for that program. The second is using the CDC model in conjunction with the port's real estate assets and powers to facilitate real estate investment. And the potential for both of these items is enough to suggest exploring the best model for a CDC in the city. And the recommendation also acknowledges that we already have a CDC in the city. It's the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation. Although their scope is limited to housing right now, that could potentially be modified to yield additional benefits. The plan recommends major changes to the city's inclusionary housing program to remodel the program to become mainly a revenue generator so that revenue in the form of in lieu fees can be used to leverage other funds for infrastructure in support of housing. I also want to point out the changes we're proposing would have the secondary benefit of actually reducing the developer's cost of complying with the program compared to the current requirements. Alternatively, the council could consider eliminating the program to have that same effect, but in the plan we've detailed several reasons why that option is problematic, and in addition to foregoing potential revenue for infrastructure.
Well, it seems like the development community would benefit if the affordable housing component was, or especially the inclusionary housing component of that, was not required on their development. So it seems like if you wanted to spur growth, that may be one way in which you can do it, is take especially the inclusionary component of that and let it go market rate. Let all of it go market rate. Let the market dictate how many homes or apartments or whatever it is that you can either sell or rent. And it seems that that would generate more revenue long-term than to continue to stay in this when there's really no 20% set aside to be used anymore. There's no incentive from for tax increments and additional funding for that redevelopment agencies receive. So why wouldn't we just do away with it?
Okay, I can offer a few reasons for that. The first being, you're exactly right, eliminating the program would be beneficial for market rate development in that there would no longer be that requirement. And that's part of the reason we're looking at an approach that would reduce the impact of the program on new development, but also provide the secondary benefit of providing some revenue that we can use to actually support new housing in the form of doing infrastructure in areas that also include affordable housing. The second reason, and it's sort of related to an item we talked about before, the IFDs. The IFDs, while they don't have a housing set-aside dollar amount, they do have an inclusionary requirement. And having the inclusionary program intact would allow us to help us along in meeting that inclusionary requirement of the IFD. We are looking at also, and this is through the state legislature's proposals regarding the IFDs, that money would be eligible to be spent on housing. It wouldn't be required, but there would be potentially some additional funding that would be at least available to help build that housing. But we sort of see the inclusionary housing program as an important resource both for the potential funding it represents, but also if we want to look to some of these other opportunities, it would be a useful tool to have to help maintain that rate. But again, the goal here is also to reduce the cost of development. That's what the proposal reflects.
But if you go back to that IFD section again, if we do something like that, then it's going to be up to us, the city, to identify a site and go out and build that affordable structure.
If the developer of that project is looking for money from us,
That's right.
that would be the typical process. We would have to approve of the area.
So we have to do it. And now what happens is they include it in their project or they pay for a certain amount that's going to go within their project area. So we know where it is. Because this is one of the issues that has surfaced in many, many communities, whereas they've collected money they've collected the housing set aside, even when they had the agency, they collected those funds. But yet when they went to build something, there was a firestorm because the people, don't build it in my backyard, don't build it here. But that's what, under the IFD process, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking it and we'll say we bank that money and over a period of time, there's enough money generated. Then you go out to spend it. Well, it's going to be up to the council or planning staff or whatever it is to identify a site, and then it'll eventually get back to us.
Right, and actually what we do now, where we have developers approach us regarding potential affordable housing projects, that really wouldn't change. What would be different is that we wouldn't have the typical source of housing set aside to offer as a gap financing tool. So the not only the IFD revenue would be eligible, but mainly what we would focus on is the inclusionary housing fees being the source for that. So it would still be a case where developers are seeking sites, coming to the city for assistance, and it would be up to the council's discretion on whether or not not only the site was appropriate, but also do you want to make the loan for this project, and does it have all the benefits we're looking for? So that wouldn't change.
Okay.
Mr. Johansson?
Just quickly, Aaron, on the IFDs, and basically you have a couple different scenarios on how extensive those can be, and based on the number of residents there and the, you know, if there's 12 or fewer, you could basically poll the residents and that's it. So it doesn't really need to be contiguous. You could have an IFD that would be, you know, half our city.
That's right. That's right.
And so this housing, I mean, the inclusionary, even though it's required in IFD, the infrastructure finance districts, it could be pretty much anywhere in town. Not particularly in that particular, not next to that project. For example, now our inclusionary housing, it's got to be within, you know, a very close proximity, I think, to the actual project, or within a more restricted
Right.
area. So under an IFD situation, even though it is inclusionary, it's pretty much just a citywide affordable housing placement.
Well, the difference to that is actually the IFD inclusion requirement means that it has to be located within the district, the 20% inclusionary housing requirement. The point we make in the plan, though, is one of the advantages of establishing an IFD early on is we already have 2 projects planned within that area. And just doing the math on the 20% inclusionary, you can build 1,000 market rate units before you even get to the need to build another one within the district.
Right.
So the in lieu fee revenue that we generated from the inclusionary housing program under this proposal could be used anywhere in the city.
Yep.
So I was just trying to understand, that last piece is helpful in terms of, we would just, the 1,000 units, but I'm trying to understand the math, because we'd have the 20% inclusionary requirement, which we already had in our own policies.
Right, 15% currently, yeah.
Which, you know, we always had to find some way to make up a gap, and we would use the 20% set aside to do that. You're saying, well, now we would use the 20%, we would use the in lieu fees from inclusionary housing, but you only pay the in lieu fee if you're not producing the housing. I'm missing, there's some amount that's missing, at least for me, in that.
Okay, so
before, the developer had the obligation, and then in addition to the developer's obligation, we had the 20% set aside, which we could or could not put in to help make that obligation work. Now the developer would have the obligation, and we would use the 20% in lieu fees, but if they're actually fulfilling their obligation, there's no in lieu fees to be paid.
Right.
Except for this initial period where we have a chunk of units that we already have in the production stream.
So if you're a developer going forward under this proposal, what we're saying is that the in lieu fee would be an option. If the developer elects to build the units on site, that is still the standard requirement. What we're doing is extending another option that would allow them to pay the fee. The advantage would be that once we get to a point with the IFD where we need to build more affordable units, we would assume we'd have a funding source from that program built up to be able to help that along.
So what you're describing then is that you're essentially using the fact that we have this first set of units in the stream, you're going to keep revolving that essentially by.
So the first units we'll be building in the Bridge District. Those are the ones that I'm referencing.
Those we're getting for free, essentially.
Right. Those no one's paying money through this proposal for that. Those units would count towards the IFD's 20% requirement. Meanwhile, assuming we're building more units in, say, Southport, the developers would have the option to pay an in lieu fee. We would be collecting those fees, which most likely wouldn't be part of the IFD in some cases, and then using that in lieu fee money in the future to meet the IFD inclusionary housing requirement. Eventually, we're going to get to a point once, say, the Bridge District develops where we'll need to build more affordable housing somewhere in that IFD. And these funds would be critical to providing that gap financing that we no longer have from housing set aside to do gap financing. But also, you know, the other point to make there is that the funding could be used to leverage infrastructure funding in the meantime.
But if you didn't have that initial set of free units, this structure doesn't work. I mean, we do, so I'm not arguing, it's not an argument against the plan, but the structure depends on those free units, doesn't it? I just don't see how it adds up otherwise.
It would be difficult to implement an IFD that would build housing units and not have a complementary inclusionary housing program. Because you would either need builders within the district to include units to meet that 20% requirement, or you would need a alternative funding source to provide gap financing. So it would be difficult.
Because it was pretty darn near difficult. It was pretty difficult before with the 20% set aside. All this structure essentially existed, except at 15%. but we have the 20% set aside.
Right.
And now we wouldn't have the 20%, we would have nothing like the 20% set aside. But the same set of obligations.
It's a higher obligation, but it is different in that it's not so prescriptive as redevelopment law, which required a very low income component. In the IFD law, it says moderate to low. So it's more flexible in nature, and that's why we're sort of trying to tailor the approach to it to be more flexible, so that we give ourselves more options for funding and location options too. The IFD that we're proposing would include both areas of Southport and the riverfront, so it wouldn't be a case where all the affordable units would need to be in the highest cost areas to build them. Get to the next one. So the last item in this group that I wanted to mention is private investment in infrastructure. Trends indicate that we'll begin to see some emerging programs that focus on bringing private capital to fund infrastructure, and we're already seeing a lot of that in the P3 model, public-private partnerships, that are being applied to revenue-generating projects, and really these are bigger projects like toll roads and that kind of thing. But we're hoping to take advantage of any new programs that the private market will produce and be involved in those conversations so that we can bring something like an IFD to the table, because it's pretty simple. If you want private investment in any form, it's going to require some sort of backing for that, whether it's a repayment stream or an asset. And so what we're really suggesting here is that we just stay in line with what the private sector is doing, and make sure that we're setting up these programs like the IFD to provide that revenue that is bondable, that could attract some of that investment.
Aaron?
Yes.
One of the questions I've had too, and that is, maybe I'm just so used to redevelopment and tax increment and those things that it seems like the IFD, it's going to struggle in the initial stages to put enough monies together so that you can go out and bond something and you can have a decent amount of money after you've bonded that, because you've got to develop that ongoing revenue source that the bond councils and the bond people will require. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. It's going to take some time to build up increment. Under the current set of law, it will take some time. Our proposal that I mentioned earlier really speaks to that, and we've actually proposed this to legislative staff, and it's, I'll at least say that they're looking at it. And the concept is we would be able to take the money that would be coming back to the city through the Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund, so that's our share of the former property tax increment, and put a elected portion into that IFD right away, with the idea being that the money that comes in, we'd be able to bond against right away. So that's our proposal, and we're hoping it gets some traction. But without that, you're absolutely right. It will take some time to build up increment in a sufficient amount to bond. And that's where I'll get to it later, but the money coming back through that Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund is critical in the early years, because we'll need something to bridge the gap for a while.
So are we going to have enough money generated to, it seems like Department of Finance is really trying to, in essence, sort of dismantle the redevelopment agencies and everything. But we've got people that are working on various portions of the old agency all the way through to where we are today. Are we going to be able to generate enough funds someplace to make sure that the people that are managing whatever redevelopment agency assets we've had and that are deemed legitimate, are we going to have enough money to fund those people all the way through?
That's a question that is in the context of the budget, and it's also addressed here. And the way we approach that is that was really the first priority, to make sure that we had sufficient funding in place to support the staff structure that will keep all this work going, not only the successor agency work, but also going forward and setting up the IFD and implementing all these other, whether it's forming a CDC, all that sort of work. So there are a couple of things we have, and they're later in here, but I can talk about them now. One is again, that redevelopment property tax trust fund. The money that is coming back to the city is being considered as part of the budget for this year, and we'll likely be looking at that going forward. But we're also talking about using a variety of other sources. One is a one-time funding source from Fund 261 of inactive counts that will bring $400,000 to this program as seed money. And then you also have the Successor Agency Administration Fund. That's a year-to-year source. So the goal is that between those sources and the other funds and community development and other parts of the city, we'll be able to maintain the structure that made redevelopment and the projects that came out of it work, the infrastructure projects. And that was one of the first priorities we looked at when we considered the plan going forward.
Because when I first read through this and then I read through the budget, I thought that you were trying to put everything into 106 and then bond against 106.
We can't do that under the current way the money flows, and that's because that money isn't technically bondable yet under the state law. It would require a voter approval to bond, and that's the challenge.
Local voter approval?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That ain't gonna happen.
And that's part of the reason we're looking at that other proposal where the money could go straight to the IFD and be immediately bondable. And if we can get that, then it sort of answers your earlier question that we have.
But that's
a
going
beginning
to
source.
take legislation from Sacramento in
Right.
order to, we're changing the law.
Right.
I think one of the philosophical approaches we had to all of this was, don't depend on Sacramento for a damn thing. And so I don't know how that's gonna work. If we ask them to make any kind of change whatsoever, I mean, it's.
Well, I want to address that
I
sort
have
of
a memo from Paul Blumberg that I'd like to share with you about
Oh, you
right
do?
now that might raise your spirits.
that sort of brings up our worst case scenario, and I did want to address that because we do have a few options at that point. One is under the current state law, we can set up an IFD now. It just wouldn't be a very big one. I do have a map that it's actually in your plan. The areas that are in Southport, Yarborough, Pake Property, Newport Estates, and the area that is on Jefferson and Gateway. Those are the areas highlighted in red on that map that you would have in your district. With the thought that, if we don't get what we want this year through the legislative process, we'll try again next year and we'll keep trying. Because all we need is one sentence basically removed to be able to form a district that has a lot more property.
Which map are you referring to?
It's in it's the Appendix A, I believe.
Scenario A?
Right. Scenario A represents the IFD as it would look if the redevelopment prohibition was removed from the existing state law. Scenario B would look like if they took out the two words substantially undeveloped from a section of the current code, that's what the IFD would look like in that case.
But there's not actually a map of what the IFD would look like if no legal change is made, right?
I was hoping, it's the last slide in the, well, we're working on that, but it's basically just those areas. So the combination of concepts there would be you would have a smaller IFD, you would keep working on legislation to change the existing code, and then thirdly, it's something that we've talked about before, just in theory, but it addresses Councilmember Christoph's point earlier. You have the money coming back from redevelopment. That money is not currently bondable, and there's really only one way to make that bondable. It's through a vote. And that would be something that it's at least in the plan as a consideration that the council could consider a general obligation bond in next year or in the future for that money. So in this map, the map on the left, the yellow highlighted areas are non-redevelopment, no residents, and undeveloped. So that would be what we could do right now with a property owner vote. Okay, if you don't mind, if there's no other questions on this for now, I'd like to just finish up the other points. We were on the real estate tools, and I really just wanted to acknowledge one of them is that the successor agency of the city own a total of 300 acres in total. But we really need a good strategy for ensuring that we get the desired disposition and development of those assets, especially in cases where ownership is commingled, and we do have a few of those. One I'd point out is at Tower Court, the property just at the east end of West Capitol. It's wedged among 10 acres of city-controlled property, and we really want to make sure that we keep that property together. So all this is really suggesting is that we come up with a strategy for how we accomplish that. Secondly, we knew the port had real estate powers under state law, but we really didn't have a good sense of how these powers could be applied to the community investment program. And so we did some research and dedicated some time, and the recommendation here is to simply apply those powers judiciously, just as we had done under redevelopment, because they are similar and similarly useful to the tools that the redevelopment agency had. The remainder of the items had to do with the budget policy for the council. We covered that, and the transfer of $400,000 from $413,000 from Fund 261 to Fund 106, and that's actually an item that's in your recommended actions to approve that budget transfer on the recommended actions for this item. And in closing, before we turn it over for more questions, I'll just say that this plan is, we expect it to be evolving as we go into the finer details of implementing these actions. And this is only the beginning of many council items that will come back to you as we start putting some of these into action. We may not have all the answers about them right now, obviously, but we tried to lay out a good roadmap of how to get us where we want to be by bringing these items together in a cohesive and realistic plan. So John Robinson was my committee co-chair and one of the drafting partners, along with Maureen Pasco. And John is here to help answer any questions with me regarding the plan. So with that, we'll turn it over to the council for discussion.
This is a pretty significant deal. You want to introduce the rest of your team on this as well, in addition
Sure.
to Maureen and John?
Definitely. It sort of goes back to the Pro West SAC committee, so I won't go through all the names there, and maybe let the council acknowledge the members there. But we had a steering committee made up of the city manager, Charlene Hamilton, community development director, Bill Panos, Carol Richardson, and Phil Wright. And then we had our community investment committee, and I really wanted to acknowledge the people on that committee for taking the time. Like I said, we had people from every department. Some were very new to this whole concept, and so it was a really interesting process. So in addition to the three people I mentioned already, we had Paul Blumberg, Amy Cameron, Mark Cullison, Greg Fabian, Katie Jacobson, Mike Lucan, Andre Pitchley, Nitish Sharma, and Sergeant Nathan Steele. So yeah, thank you for that. I definitely want to thank my committee members.
All right. Are there questions at this, or comments at this stage, leading off with Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you. Thank you. Aaron, thanks for the presentation and the report. And first, it's just, it was, I hate to say this about kind of the length of the documents we get, but it was a pleasure to read. It was great. It was, you took a broad approach, you and the rest of the staff. So thank you for your work on this. And we've known this is coming, and so I appreciate the work you've all done on this. A couple of just observations, and some of the questions around the IFDs obviously is the major part of of the discussion in the document, and along with some of the questions that were raised by Mr. Kristoff and the mayor, are kind of where I was rooted on it, because I think when we talked about IFDs back at the Pro West SAC discussions, it didn't, while we looked into it, you addressed a lot of the legislative changes that had to be made. I mean, you really dug into it and you came up with a solution. If certain parts of it could be amended through the legislative process, it would open up what you've laid out. And I think the part that, I'm glad you said it's an evolving process. It's just the part that we worry about, and I kind of circled it under our Pro West SAC conclusions, which is the first principle is we're dependent upon the state for the formation of this. So I worry about it, and only in the sense that you've thoughtfully and creatively built a model to get back to at least some level of a mechanism to fund the community investment we've had as we've had it. And I think at first needs to be said, we'll probably never get back to that level. And I think you state that in the report. It just worries me to a degree that IFDs, I'm curious to what the reaction has been from the legislative staff you've talked with about it. Obviously, you're asking for simple removals, but I've also heard in the past, at least the last fall when we were discussing it, discussions from the governor's office, that he saw this as just redevelopment too. It was not going to get past his desk. That sort of reaction we were getting. So I'm just trying to think of we'll get your reaction, what you've heard so far, and from the legislative staff.
Sure.
They've been open to it, but.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier there were some positive indications, and then I compare that to last year. We were in a very different environment last year when redevelopment was in the process of being eliminated. The bill that was in front of the legislature last year was SB 214, Lois Wolk's bill, that had proposed to remove the voter requirement entirely. And we had heard at that time that that was the main issue with the governor's office, that removing or even reducing the voter requirement was not something that would fly. The reason I say this year is a little more positive is because you have, at least, and I don't have all the details on this, but at the Assembly level and the Senate level, there are staff dedicated to working on a future program for something that tries to do some of what redevelopment did. And I know we said, let's not rely on the state, and we are emphasizing that. The only reason the IFD item is so attractive is because of the property tax share that West Sacramento receives and the potential for actually making it useful here, and the other parameters we outlined in the plan. We have a lot of vacant land, a lot of uninhabited land. Assemblymember Perez, the Speaker of the Assembly, has a bill, introduced the bill that initially all it would have done is eliminate the redevelopment requirement or redevelopment prohibition, and that's really all we need to get going. And that's the part I want to stress, is that we're not looking for wholesale changes to the law to make this a viable option. We're looking for one, maybe two things. The additional proposal that we're putting forward is really in the context of Perez's bill, which does a lot more now. It expands the scope of IFDs. It almost does make it look a little bit like redevelopment used to. So that's part of the strategy, that we want to make sure that we support a bill like that, because it will open up a whole lot of other options, but that we have a plan B that really focuses on just getting what we need done. Something that we hope the governor wouldn't object to, because again, all we're using is our own property tax. It's a local decision, and we're not messing with the voter requirement. So that's the reason I say it's a little more positive this session, is because we're out of that that pre-elimination environment and into trying to actually solve this problem. And at least at the level of the legislature, it's been encouraging.
Right. So so in the context of the IFD model that you've outlined, which is taken into two assumptions, at least two assumptions. And first is using the current housing stock as sort of the affordable housing coming online to kind of provide, for lack of a better term, the seed, the initial seed. And then you're going to bring in, you're going to allow the second influx of funds to be obviously the more units we can, and I think you put in to promote density and all those sorts of things, which that would actually start to build up, because what you're after is to get in the critical mass to where it could start to be something you can bond against. Is the initial housing, is there no rules around how you can, that first assumption, is there no rules around your ability to use that in terms of the going forward model?
As long as the units come online following the formation of the district, they meet the definition of low and moderate income that the IFD code refers to. So at least in our interpretation, we'll of course look at that very closely, but it appears that we'll be able to bank those units, if you will, for that requirement.
And then through the budget adjustment that you're asking for, that's the sort of the second seed influx that would be reserved for this as well, correct?
Right. The money that we're asking to be transferred really was being used for community investment purposes. It was under the Housing and Community Investment Department's old budget. There are defunct programs that had a redevelopment tie-in, and it seemed appropriate that we use that money to provide some seed funding to support, something as basic as match for a grant application for infrastructure. We don't have that anymore, and so that would be a potential use for that money.
Is there, and this is for the city manager, maybe with the context of of some of the communication or actions we've seen from the Department of Finance. Is this those finances in any way, those monies we're looking at in any way being viewed by the Department of Finance since they were associated with redevelopment activity in the past?
No, in fact, they would like us to have a bigger share. They would like to take more away from tax increment and put it back in the taxing entities. And we're one of the taxing entities that gets the money back. So I don't see that there would be any difficulty from the Department of Finance to have that flow of money actually increase. That would be their preference.
And actually, the original source of that 400,000, I believe, either it came from general fund or TOT funds. So it wasn't redevelopment in origin. So I guess that's the point. So under the rules of Department of Finance is following, they couldn't take money that wasn't from redevelopment in the first place.
I know the action plan again is really the centerpiece of this is the IFD proposal, and you set up a model for that. Part of what I would like to see going forward is, and you allude to it, is looking at the port as well. I think that's what some of the pro-West Sac members we sort of articulated was what's the potential for the port. And granted, the port has its own issues that it's dealing with, but as an entity, I think everyone recognized, and you did too, because it's in there as an action plan. But it would be interesting, I think that's where the next area that, as we evolve this plan, is to see what role it could play. And I think the comment that looking at a CDC, which I might, think differently on after seeing what Roseville did. I think we met with Roseville, and then what they were able to do and how they were able to fund it. And it certainly brings a lot of different components to the table. But the port, because of its wide geographic district and its powers, it seemed like the likely successor, so to say, to that mission. And especially in light of, what you put down is, you're right, there's three components of this, and one is the infrastructure financing, two is the real estate tools, the port has that, and right. Three is the other economic development activities that need to get funded. And the port order already sort of acts that way through what the work that Mike does in terms of trying to build economic development, but only in the sense of the port. And I think what we were contemplating as well was just where does that function go today without redevelopment, which served as sort of the economic development front for the city. So again, that's what we sort of saw as sort of the synergies were there already, just maybe it's an expansion of its mission. Or its mission is already there, it's actually just delegating it that sort of authority. Right. So I think that's what we were looking at as well. I might have a few other questions, but I don't want to occupy the time.
Johannesson?
Yeah, Aaron, good job on this. You and your team, really a lot of thought went into it, and really kudos to you all for getting this together and fleshing this out. It really provides, I think, a lot of options. And I think, I think that's a good thing about this document, because I'm concerned too about the set of IFDs and what the state can do to those at some point in the future. And the state's policies are clearly housing and education, and ours are economic development and creating a community, so we don't necessarily have the same purpose. And so to the extent that we can be hit by the state in any of these, it's probably to our best advantage to diversify and develop as many tools as possible, concurrently. So we're not really left with a single device, but a number of devices that we can use and be flexible in the event of any shifting. I just don't know what, what's going to happen with this, with the governor and, status of these bills coming forward, whether or not they're having a chance of passing. But what's going to be happening here is we're going to really start looking at private sector as partners. There's going to be really a lot more consultation with private sector, really looking at what their returns are, what their expected returns are, and how we can help bridge those gaps, because there's just not going to be the money to fill the gaps. And so we're going to have to be creative on that. And with that is going to come, I think, some transparency issues. you know, the closer we work with the private side with government funds, we're going to need to make sure, for example, what we did with Measure K, reports on how this money is being spent,
Right.
particularly when there's private interest involved. And really, you know, one of the, a lot of the comments against redevelopment is that there hasn't been really any way to measure whether it's done anything at all. You know, there's really, there's no real evidence that all that redevelopment money really helped. And, you know, what I would really like to see is maybe looking at the benefits of some of these projects as we move forward. Not just the direct economic benefit in terms of the dollars, but we also have the indirect economic benefits like jobs and some of these other things that, and how it supports, you know, more housing supporting, you know, the retail and that type of thing. But also the indirect benefits, for example, building community and those types of things that you mentioned in the report, to maybe try to, as we move along these projects, to really be able to have something we can show the community that this is why we're doing this. These are the benefits that we're doing. You know, here's a rate of return that the city's getting for its investments, those types of things that we can really show that we're really, we're being strategic in where we're going to focus our money, and that it's working, and we need to show that it's working, because I think this is all a really good plan. Budget now, you're asking that $413,000 be shifted to the Community Investment Fund. Now, $300,000 is coming out of the motels and mobile home parks. What policy implications are there?
Well, to my knowledge, that program has been inactive for a while here, and so I think it would just be the opportunity cost at this point of shifting that money to this purpose versus something else.
So this doesn't have anything to do with the mobile home rehabilitation?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, none of the rehab programs. Right.
That was my concern. Right. Let's see. I think that's. One of the elements in here are things that the redevelopment agency usually do, business attraction, marketing, and that type of thing. Again, because there's going to be more private sector involvement in these, I would imagine we're going to be looking at how do we partner business attraction as well within these projects. So it's not going to, I mean, there's going to be more sharing of resources, I would think, in you know, developing, bringing people here and bringing business. Of course, there's areas where it's strictly a city function to develop undeveloped land, but to the extent we have large developments, we may find some partners that you know, we can team up on marketing and things like that. And I know we've done it in the past, but you know, we're really going to be, I think, tied at the hip on some of these bigger projects. For example, the Bridge District and the branding that's going to be happening there, and how these monies that we're helping bring into that, you know, how we can help each other make these projects move forward.
Right, and actually one of the typical functions of some CDC models is involved in exactly that, and so we would look at that potential. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Well,
I think it's great work.
Go ahead, Mr. I'll go real quick. I'll be very brief. I asked a bunch of questions earlier. First of all, I'd like to thank Chris for Yeoman's job. I think you did a great job as far as getting things really moving on this. And you, Mr. Mayor Cabaldon, you've done a really good thing. City Manager Phil and all of, and Bill and all of your other staff that you've had work with it. You have taken West Sacramento really to a different level. I honestly do believe that there are going to be other communities that see this document and they are going to try to emulate. They'll take parts of it and then dissect other parts. But I mean, I think this is the first of its kind, and we're all in a whole new world, so to speak, and don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, I think we've made some assumptions, but your whole team really needs to be commended, and you guys on the council do too. I do think that the port has the potential to really assist with future developments in West Sacramento, and I'd really like to to dig in as far as the port is concerned. I don't know what's going to happen to IFDs. I mean, it seems like it's the most logical, it's the easiest, it's something that works. It doesn't generate a whole hell of a lot of money, but at the same time, it possibly can generate substantial amounts of money. But at the same time, then you have the state over here. As soon as we make, and a number of other communities go out and make IFDs a really workable, profitable engine that starts economic development, the state is going to want to take it. I mean, it's just the reality of what the heck they do. I mean, they can't do anything on their own themselves, and so they're out here to, I don't want to say punish, but at the same time to really hamper what goes on as far as the cities are concerned. And I realize that they have different priorities. So they've got, you know, priority of school and maybe some housing. And, you know, we've got the priority of economic development. And quite frankly, where I think that the state is very, very short-sighted, and that is since we do the economic development and we generate the monies, we generate monies for the schools. I mean, you know, something gets lost in the mix of this whole thing, because once you ruin economic development, and then you're really going to be in a strange situation as far as how are you going to fund your schools? What are you going to do? I mean, now you've taken away this economic engine that cities had as far as developing good projects and everything else, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get things all started up. But one of the other things I would like to do is something that Mark had suggested earlier, and that is I'd like to have a measuring stick as far as measure the benefits that this has done so that we can report back to the community in very clear, concise language. You know, we did this, folks, and this is what we did. We bonded X number of dollars for this particular project. These are the things that are happening because of that. And then we can just go right down the line. It won't happen all at one time, but we can at least show progress every single year, sort of like we do with Measure K. I mean, I'm really happy with the way, you know, that whole thing has turned out, and quite frankly, it's really very easy to show Measure K, you know, to Joe Smith at the grocery store. It's really easy, and it's understandable. So anyway, but those were just a couple of last comments. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I have just a couple quick thoughts, please?
No. We're going to go a second round.
Go ahead.
But, so I mean, I think it is outstanding work. It's the kind of stuff that I feel lucky to be able to serve on the council, to work with, to collaborate with staff of the caliber that work for the city. This is really excellent in terms of its content, and it's very understandable and very well put together. I mean, I think the implications here are big in terms of the way that we handle. This is not a new economic development program. Redevelopment is gone. All of the things that we were dependent upon for redevelopment are still true. This does not solve this. This doesn't give us 90% of redevelopment, and now we need to tweak around the edges. It fundamentally changes what our role in the world and in the universe is. And these are not called redevelopment districts. They're infrastructure financing districts. And so to me, it's a reminder, and where I might disagree a little bit in degree with Mr. Johannesson, I think we're going to be less interested in seeing pro formas and gaps and stuff. There's nothing I can do about it any longer. Under a redevelopment scenario, if the Ramos project had a gap and we looked at it and said, okay, here's a reasonable rate of return we'd like to get them to so they can make this project work. Here with redevelopment, we will look at as one alternative helping to meet that gap. That was at least theoretically possible. That is not possible in infrastructure financing districts, because the district can only be used for the purpose of infrastructure. And appropriately so, because in addition to their scope constraints, it's a lot less money. I mean, it's more than other communities because of our tax share, but because the state's share of the taxes are not in play, and either the other local agencies, is a lot less money. So our ability to sort of be the closer, to be the grease for economic development writ large is gone. And we need to understand that. Our partners have to understand that that's not a role that we have the capacity to play anymore. We are about the infrastructure, right? That's something no one else can do. Only we can do the infrastructure. We have to be about the infrastructure, and that's what the IFD is a way to solve. But it doesn't put us back into the business of being everyone's lender or grantor of last resort. That has to be really clear in the way that we evolve our community investment work, is that this is not redevelopment times 0.8. It's a completely different approach that focuses on infrastructure. Now, to be fair, one of the reasons we've been successful and other communities haven't is that we were already doing that. You know, we were not one of the places that was very open to project proponents coming to us and saying, "Here's my books. You know, I need 11% rate of return, and the way it works right now, I can only get 9. But if you give me $150,000, I'll be at 11. I'll build my project." A lot of places did operate that way, and we did do projects like that occasionally. But we had already made the determination. The Bridge District is a very good example of that. Is we're not doing that. What we do is invest in the roads and the parks and the bike lanes and the fishing piers and the other things that are part of the public realm, the infrastructure, the sewer and the water, so that all the and then the actual development of private projects is a private responsibility. And so and that's going to become especially important because the real measure here is quite clear. The metric isn't overall community enhancements and all of that. It is, are we going to be able to repay whatever bonds we issue through the district, right? If we're going to issue bonds to build roads in something like the Bridge District or sewer or water or whatever, we need to be absolutely certain that that will generate the increase in tax revenue received by us in order to pay those bonds off. That's the only measure that matters, right? So the direct economic benefit, more than ever before, because we don't have the cushion of the state's share any longer, the direct economic benefit has to track with the investments that we make out of the financing district. Now, we've been pretty clear about that. It's one of the things I liked about redevelopment is it made investments in things like relocating the rail spur off the waterfront or those sort of things. When we discussed them, we said, if we do this, it's very expensive. It's $26 million. Frankly, we wouldn't be able to explain it at the supermarket the next day. But we could see, we look at the numbers. Okay, 10 years out, here's the change in our property tax revenue. 11 years out, here's the point where the community as a whole makes a profit essentially out of that project. So it's very strict economics and finance, right? It's in that sense, it's very transparent to the public. You know, it's not sometimes we say, well, it's about just making a better world or a world peace. We're trying to make these numbers, and the bond repayments require that. So to me, we have to be very disciplined around the way we think about what our role is in this kind of a world around community investment, and it is around infrastructure, and it's strictly around infrastructure that pays off for the community, but pays off for the community in terms of the property tax change. Otherwise, this whole edifice does not function because we don't have the support or the full faith and credit of the state to back us up in that sense. So the message on our economic development ought to be, we do infrastructure, right? That's what we do, and let's work together to make sure that happens. But if you got other stuff in mind, we got really limited tools in that regard from going forward basis. So frankly, to convince the bond markets to invest in things like these IFDs, that's going to be especially critical. If I'm in the public bond market, given the way the state of California has treated bonds and enforceable obligations and all these issues right up to now, and I'm sure Mr. Blumberg has a new memo about some new bond that's been questioned by the state. The callous disregard for the obligations of the public sector that the state of California is tossing around makes these markets nervous, and we have to be sensitive to that in terms of the portfolio that we're trying to build. In terms of a potential IFD. So I think it's the right solution. The legislative piece, the modest legislative stuff that we're asking for doesn't have a fiscal effect on the state, and so it's at least within the realm of possibility, and I'm supportive of it, although I would like to see it. This is an ongoing issue. I'd like to see it, but I think that we have a shot, and it's worth continuing to press in that regard. The one question: are IFDs covered by Prop 22? I mean, the legislature's ability to divert, the flow of revenues into IFDs,
I haven't looked at that. I would say it would be much more difficult than with redevelopment agencies because we're talking about taking property taxes that are designated for the city. And Prop 22 was specifically intended to protect those sorts of revenues. Now, we thought it also protected redevelopment revenue. So, but when you look at the court's decision to uphold 26, it upheld it on the grounds that the state had the power to dissolve redevelopment agencies. It didn't uphold it on the grounds that they had the property to divert tax revenue.
But the state would still have the power to dissolve IFDs.
They would have the power to dissolve IFDs, but as I understand the proposals, that would simply remove your ability to bond that money because it would no longer be a segregatable funding source that you could issue bonds on. The property taxes would still come to the city.
Okay. Just a couple of other stray questions. The June 2013 date that you have in here for a potential public vote that we might consider in terms of the budget policy around essentially continuing that the redevelopment fund budget allocations, that costs us more money than doing it in November of 2012 because we have to call a special election and we get lower turnout. What was the thinking behind that time frame?
The thinking was mainly to let the IFD issue play out a little more and see if that became something that looked like it would at least solve the bonding question in companion with our proposal, and then take another look at it once we get past January and see where we're at. That would still give enough time for a June election. So it was really to not put the two issues on sort of the same track, I guess, since we have potentially something that could work being done through the legislature, assuming the governor signs it.
Okay, I would still would like to see it in August or whatever the time frame, early August, late July, whatever I think we need to consider November of 2012. I mean, I don't want to go out and spend a couple $100,000 or whatever it is for a special election that we don't have to. If it's a direction that would make sense in any of the potential outcomes.
If I could add one more thing, it's also the difference of what the vote would be asking
I see.
for.
Okay. So it's 55 versus
an advisory vote
2/3.
versus a general obligation bond are two very different, thresholds. And so that was part of the thinking also, that if we weren't asking for an advisory measure and we're asking for a general obligation bond, waiting until next June made more sense because the threshold's a lot higher. And it would pay to see what happens with the IFD legislation first and then make that assessment at that time. But an advisory measure would be something that would be a little different.
And we could do that in November. I mean, I guess what I would ask is that we proceed on that path. I mean, we don't have to make a final decision until August. But we can't make a final decision in August if we're not preparing that now.
I think your decision would need to be made in July in order to get it on the ballot. I think it's got to be submitted to the county in early August, I believe.
I thought it was on the same time frame as the candidate
Elections.
filings, basically, which is early
We'll
August.
look at that and see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's again why we're here in May as well, to give the headway for that.
I mean, to keep our options open, that would mean having it on our agenda schedule for consideration in the meetings in July, in both meetings in July, in order, if we chose to place it on the ballot, we would have a better sense of what was happening conceivably in the legislature by then, as to whether or not spending the money for a special election would be worth it at a later date. I like the Community Development Corporation. I wasn't impressed with Roseville, frankly, but if there's this new market tax credit piece, I mean, focusing in on that potential, I think is worthwhile. So I mean, just that creating one for creating one's sake, I didn't find to be a compelling option. But if there's this tax credit option, I'm certainly interested in that too. CDBG, the entitlement status. So we've talked about this before, and with the trade-off being if we were an entitlement city, we would get a lot more flexibility about how to spend that money, and we could, but we would get a lot less money. At least that's
Potentially.
That's what you said when you were in the CDBG section of the city staff.
Right.
When you were the one that actually filled out the applications that we wouldn't be filling out if we were in entitlement status, you said that we would lose a lot of money.
The question on CDBG is sort of a matter of what's going on with the federal budget. And in the current budget environment, CDBG is always a target. We can look to our neighboring cities and see what the effect of that has been and conclude that the amount of money we would get would be less than what we are getting right now from the state. The trade-off is, of course, it's really twofold. One is that we don't have to deal with the state rules. We're just dealing with federal regs. The second part is there's a program that allows you to essentially bond against your CDBG funds. It's called Section 108. It's only available to entitlement cities, so it basically allows you to do something bigger earlier, and you can use 10 years worth of your future allocation. So that's the other advantage it brings, and I know that wasn't in the plan, but that's something to highlight.
So, but the question is, what's the magnitude? I mean, do you expect in aggregate would we get a little bit less, but a lot more flexibility in bonding, or a lot less?
You know, I honestly can't say, not knowing what the allocation amount would be. It would take some analysis. I think there may be a formula we can try to figure it out, but that would be part of the process of analyzing to see if we may conclude that once we talk to HUD and maybe there's a way to figure it out there, that it doesn't make sense and just wait until 2020. But just for the potential for the Section 108 program and the idea that we would have at least 20% of those funds available for staff to be able to predict every year what we'd be getting would be something better than what we have now.
Okay. Well, as we learn more about that, I'd like to. We were probably 80% of the way through a special redesignation from HUD, from the Secretary's office, through little shenanigans in D.C. But we pulled it back because of this. When we realized we would be a net loser in terms of dollars. But getting some clarity about whether if that's really is in our best interest, then we've got a lot of options. Not all of them are legislative, in order to achieve it faster than 2020.
Sure, we can make that the first thing we look at really with the analysis and try to get to the dollars.
All right. And the last question is a political one. The realtors are against this IFD. These kind of simple IFD things.
Right. They are currently on the Perez bill listed in opposition. In at least the hearing at the committee level, there was no one representing the realtors that spoke. In talking to our lobbyists a little bit about it, it may just be an issue of a misunderstanding about that it's not a new tax. So it's not. That's typically what they oppose is a new property tax, and I think once it's made clear that we're not raising taxes with this, and actually we're not introducing eminent domain for the districts either, and that's why some of the other parties are opposed. Hopefully that will alleviate that concern.
Did you brief the Housing Commission on this, or I know you haven't yet, but
no.
Is that on the schedule to brief?
Well, I know the
EDAC and housing.
EDAC is we're planning to do an update.
Yeah, we can do both.
All right. The Housing Commission chairman, is that right? Is also the chairman of the Realtors Political Action Committee for the region, not for the state. But I mean, there are a lot of active realtors in the community who are also active in the Realtors Association and could be potential advocates for a change in their position. So, okay, Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I was going to bring up the one item which you already did, which was around the advisory vote, because you put it at June 13. It was just something I was going to ask about. So you covered that. But again, thanks, Aaron. This is all great work.
Thank you.
All right, any other discussion? And there is a motion, a request from the staff that we accept the plan and that we approve the budget adjustment. Moved by Mr. Johannesson.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Ledesma. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, item 10 is presentation and discussion of midterm adjustments to the city's adopted two-year budget ending June 30th, 2013. right.
Good evening, Mayor Cabalden and council. Purpose of this agenda item is for staff to present the proposed midterm adjustments to the city's two-year budget for fiscal year 1220-13 for discussion and direction. Staff will be coming back to the council on June 20th with the final proposed budget adjustments. In addition to the agenda report, you have been provided with a very short memorandum requesting an extension of one limited term position that was inadvertently left off of our attachment B, that was the personnel actions, and an additional recommended action to authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with Acela Automation for the purchase and update of software installation of the city's permitting system. So those, I hope you have that memo in front of you. Excuse me. Staff is asking the council to approve also the proposed budget policy, which Aaron was referring to in his previous report, which is attachment C to the agenda report. And that proposed budget policy directs that the funds returning to the city from the new redevelopment property tax trust fund that we've all gotten to know as the RPTTF be placed into Fund 101, the Community Investment Fund, for continued investment in infrastructure and economic development, with the council overseeing and authorizing the use of all of those community investment fund monies. In accordance with the city's budget policy, the agenda report also provides council with a status update on the revenues and expenses for fiscal year 2011-12. As you can see from charts, excuse me, as you can see from charts A, B, and C to the report, the General Fund, Community Development Fund, and Public Works Engineering Funds, which are the ones we've been focusing on, are all estimated to end fiscal year 2011 in the black or in positive numbers. It's important to note that, as the agenda report points out, that they're in the positive numbers partly because we use substantial one-time money, one-time contributions from the general fund to support community development and public works engineering, and the continued significant concessions from all of the city employee groups. All of these items were included in the budget at the time it was adopted a year ago. One of the things that wasn't included in the budget, but is included in those charts, A, B, and C, is staff's expectation that the expenditures remain at about 98% of the budget. And I'm pleased to report that every department is below 98% and many in more than the 95%. So we feel fairly safe that our expenditures will come in below 98%. The other two funds that are addressed in the agenda report are Measure K and the Road Fund. As you know, every year the staff presents a detailed Measure K report that has been talked about tonight. And that report will be coming back to you next month. Nitish Sharma, our budget manager, will be preparing and presenting that report next month. This item is simply included to inform the council that Measure K funding for capital projects has been completely allocated, so there's no money for capital projects. And for the base expenditures, we have a structural deficit of about $460,000 a year. We have approximately a $2.2 million balance, cash balance in Measure K, which we're using to keep the fund balanced, but it's going to be something we're going to have to address. With regard to the road fund, current revenues are adequately supporting all of the ongoing road projects and road maintenance. But again, like Measure K, there's no money in the road fund for future capital improvement projects, so we're going to have to address that. With regard to the mid-year adjustments, there are some proposed adjustments for the second year. These adjustments basically are proposed to account for some of the changes in projected revenues and expenditures. To fine-tune the organization, we've gone through substantial reorganizations the last couple of years. We're not looking for another reorg. We're just looking to fine-tune some of those reorganizations. And then to target the resources we have. As you know, we've gone from 422 FTEs down to currently 332. So we're almost 100 employees less, and so we have to target our resources to the policy and management agendas that the council has adopted for 2012. All of those changes have been incorporated in the figures for the 2012-13 revenues and expenditure tables, which are charts D, E, and F for fiscal year 12-13. Important to note that our proposed changes do not result in any increase in FTEs. There are no additional authorized positions, and the proposed adjustments are cost neutral. And those were the directions given to staff by our city manager. All of the departments have done a very good job in meeting those expectations. So tonight, staff is asking the council to concur with our proposed adjustments, noting again, as stated at the beginning, that we will come back to you in June, on June 20th, with our final budget, but we want to make sure we're going in the right direction. We're asking that you approve the recommended budget policy regarding the use of former tax increment money returning to the city. We're asking you authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement to update the city's permitting system. With that, staff is prepared to answer any questions council may have on the specific budget adjustments that are outlined in the report.
Mr. Johannesson.
Phil, there's no increase in the FTEs. I guess that's the conclusion of this. But is there an increase of costs of some of these position changes?
There may be some additional costs in certain positions, but they're always offset by reductions in other positions. So for example, just use a quick example, in Public Works, we're increasing a position from a secretary to a construction person, but we have an offset of 2 full-time positions who had voluntarily asked to go to part-time. So the direction of the city manager was, if there were increases and you had decreases in other areas, that was okay.
Is it the same case in police and fire?
Yes, essentially, in police and fire, you have a division chief in the fire department who position going away, and you have a lower battalion chief position coming in, so it's actually a savings. You have a slight adjustment in the hazmat fund, but that's paid for by fees.
And the police?
Police, the adjustments in police, and I'm trying to do this by memory, we have a captain position. It's an upgrade that was already, the $12,000 was already in the budget previously approved. You have the 3 lieutenants. Then the chief is recommending that 1 sergeant position that currently controls the internal affairs division, that function go to a lieutenant function because it's doing investigations of people in the same bargaining unit. And we can afford to do that because we have the money coming from the 109 money, which is going to allow him to backfill a sergeant, so they have the same number of sergeant positions.
The 109 money is grant, though, isn't it?
I'm sorry, yes.
It's a grant, and or do we expect that to be continue every? Is it guaranteed every year?
No, I certainly don't think the money's guaranteed past 1 year, as I understand it. So we'll have to. It appears in the governor's current revise that he's supportive of continuing money to the counties for the realignment, but I can't guarantee anything the state's going to do.
So, all right.
The chief can help.
So I guess my question is
it's technically not grant money, but give you an idea, we're working at the CCP right now. We have received the information what the second year funding is. Last year's funding, as you remember, on a prorated basis for 9 months was about 3.3 million, and so it penciled out to a little over 4 million on an annualized basis. So we've been told this year that Yolo County's share will be increased somewhere between $5.9 to $6 million. And so that money appears to be solid, and there's no concerns about that not continuing. In fact, the governor's office has, the governor's staff has entertained, the governor said he would be supportive at some point of even doing a constitutional amendment if necessary to guarantee the continued flow of that money.
Yeah, that would be just my concern, that if there is an additional cost here, and that additional cost is being funded by a non-stable revenue source, then we're potentially setting ourselves up, if that revenue source fails, what are we going to do about the deficit?
I understand.
Okay, thanks.
Did you say that we previously approved a captain's position?
No. No, I did not say that. If I did, I misspoke. I hope I didn't say that.
You said
No,
it was
I said it
funded
was
by-
previously funded. There was, in the budget last year, the chief had put in $12,000, actually he put in 24, I believe, for some potential changes, but the position was not approved.
Just on the 109 issue, I would like to be, I mean, we were very, the council spent a lot of time on the potential consequences of the implementation of 109 and the threats and the response that we want to have in the community with respect to those offenders being returned to or put into the community. I would like, since we had no role whatsoever in joining the partnership or governing it or allocating the funding, I would like to make sure that we see a 109 allocation budget as part of the final budget. Okay. So that it's not just a $5 went over here and $6 paid for a new canine collar and $8 over there, but that we're really seeing that every dollar that we're getting from 109 is being used to make sure that with those offenders coming back to our community that we are providing the full and adequate level of protection. So, and that it's not being used as it shouldn't be used as a sort of a fill-in fund elsewhere until, unless unless we're convinced that we are fully meeting the public safety needs as a result of those offenders being released to the community. So I would just like to see the 109.
We'll make sure that happens.
But as a whole for that purpose. And code enforcement, I know code enforcement used to be in community development. It might have switched twice since the time I've been on the council. And I think I understand the reason. When code enforcement was switched to the police department, I have to say it was treated with a higher level of respect by offenders. Even though community development can also be, appropriately mean if they have to be. Having, the police department being the one that is citing and warning does have a different impact than a senior planner.
You have not dealt with Charlene Hamilton yet, obviously.
No, but I did deal with Steve Riccolo from a long time ago, and so I just want to understand I know there's a lot of things that go into those sorts of choices, but was that element of sort of the perceived the perceived consequences of not cooperating with code enforcement part of the calculus?
Go ahead.
Yes, it was, and a corollary of that was also considered, and that is the reaction that we get from the public sometimes when they think that we're overstepping our bounds because we look a little too much like the police department. And so what I think has really motivated it is the sense that these are all about neighborhood quality, and we get a sense that the Community Development Department is better positioned to establish priorities to achieve that outcome than the police department is. And I think at the time it moved to the police department, it was very appropriate to do that because there was a need, there was a much more dramatic need for solid enforcement presence in the community than there is today. Today, we need to have considerable effort in problem solving and neighborhood cooperation, and we think that the priorities are better set in the Community Development Department, and the oversight of that operation is likely to be more consistent than it has been in the police department. Well, and they will still look official and still be able to cite.
The signs actually, the sign ordinance actually comes to mind as an example of how the public can conceive of these issues differently, right? If it's a police officer telling you that your sign, a code enforcement officer under the aegis of the police department telling you that your sign is inappropriate, your normal dealings with a police officer, you know that the appropriate response isn't, yes, but somebody else committed a murder across the street too. Right? There's not an expectation of universal, if it's not universally enforced, then it shouldn't apply to me, which is a common refrain in code, a common refrain. And with planning, with the planning, there's an expectation of universality, that if you're gonna do the affirmative work of the city as opposed to the enforcement work, that you would need to be doing, either it's everybody or nobody. And so I'm not opposed to, I know a lot of work from both departments and your office has gone into this, but we should, I hope we will have some way of evaluating whether this really is the right approach once we make the move, because I didn't find it to be particularly effective the first go around. And both departments have changed a lot, the whole city's changed a lot, but what didn't particularly work that well in community development in the first phase of the city compared to its current location. So.
We had a very positive meeting with the code enforcement staff earlier this week, and I can assure you that our intent is to make it work better, and as we told them, and with their help, we hope to be able to do that. But.
And then just my last technical question is on the 3 limited term program managers in community development. So 100% of what they're doing now is funded either through grants or shared services, or?
Yes, I believe that is correct. With the shared services and the grants, we have them covered.
Successor.
And let me actually, we have some successor agency money coming back. Yeah. And also, just one other point.
Have you not talked to Mr. Blumberg today?
No, and I get the good news today. And also, one other thing to point out is in the budget approved a year ago, we had anticipated that we would, the 4 would go away, we would have 1 regular, and so we've eliminated that. So that money, the successor money, the grants, and the shared services cover all of the salaries for an additional year.
And Phil, the item that we brought on this evening where we have that 4th member.
Yes.
And that is actually funded by a different program. It's not in the
all 4 of them are completely funded.
That's terrific.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Christoph?
Yeah, I too would like to have an accounting of 109. It's this has been an issue since day one, and I still would like to have an accounting of that, and I'd like some further feedback as far as if Woodland and West Sacramento are getting the majority of folks, how's the allocation split up? So I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Also on the code enforcement issue, the mayor brings up a very good point. I don't know what it is, but I really like the idea of code enforcement being with the police department. It seemed like it was very, very effective. I know you guys you're gonna try something different here, but this will be one that I'm gonna try to keep track of. And if it needs to change again real quick, well then I'll come back and ask to have it be changed. But it just makes so much sense that code enforcement officers command the respect, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what it is, but especially if they're associated with the police department. So that's one, because, and I like them being there. Also, I don't have any problem with moving to the captain's position, but I think there should be 3 lieutenants instead of 4. If we're gonna move one of those up, I mean, I just don't want to get so top heavy that you know, the rank and file are sort of feeling, I don't want to have them feel sort of neglected or something. So I would like to, that's one of the things I'd like to throw out as far as the council's concerned. I don't mind the captain position, and I understand the chief trying to set, you know, different designations all the way down, but I think 3 lieutenants could probably handle that. Those are really the only things that I had. I was very pleased with the budget, and I thank you very much for finding all the pots of money and all the other things that were necessary to make this much more palatable than previous budgets. So, but thanks you and your staff.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Phil, in the staff report, it says the concessions from bargaining groups, and you're looking at approximately 5%. So I understand, I know we're mid-year in a 2-year cycle. Is that an assumption? And if we don't get to that, then we're in a deficit by the end of the year if we have agreement, right? I mean, there's a degree of faith that's been placed in this next 12 months.
We have concessions of 5% from all bargaining units except for fire and from all the unrepresented. Currently, fire is actually at 6%. As you'll recall, all groups were at 3% for a couple years. We had proposed some layoffs in the fire department. Fire and staff got together, and the city carried 3 firefighters for 6 months until they retired, and the union has taken some additional cuts for a period of time. We are in negotiations with fire right now. So the budget does assume that we have either 8% and 60 firefighters or 5% and 57 firefighters.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes sense. The comments from my colleagues earlier about the AB 109, I would add an emphasis to the recommendation that we pull that out. 2 reasons. One, I think the mayor alluded to, we didn't have any say in kind of how that was going to be. And I don't want to micromanage it, but we didn't even have a workshop on it. And 2, if I remember correctly, there is no definitive plan countywide. If I remember correctly, we were presented at the beginning of the year, or at the end of last year, a provisional plan, a very temporary plan that had not been solidified, which, if I remember correctly, I asked when we would get a more definitive plan, and it was coming because there's still a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of unknown data. I definitely don't want to be using AB 109 money for upper management at this early stage. We're not even 12 months into it. I know there's a potential increase in funds, and that's a good thing, but the notion that we're going to commit those dollars to a captain position when we don't have a plan that we've seen and how it's going to roll out, I'm very nervous about going down that path. And
I may say the same thing the chief's going to say, but the 109 money is going to go to a sergeant who will be assigned to run the 109. You can give me the correct term that you've used.
But that's actually not what I was going to say, but that is the point. That is a point. It's funding a sergeant's position that oversees the compliance monitoring team. Right now, we've taken that position out of Hyde, and we want to restore that funding, and it gives us the flexibility to do the things that you saw tonight. But the bigger point is there is, by the time the mayor's, I think, points were right on here, there is going to be a 12-month full plan coming from the CCP through the Board of Supervisors that's approved. Of course, it'll be run through the city manager's office before that time. So you will see that complete plan of how all the funds for the county are being used by the sheriff's department and their aspects of it, the social service providers, the frontline law enforcement agencies. So it will all be very clear to you. And our funds are carefully segmented or separated out that they will be only into those functions. And as the mayor described, they will not be a part here and a part there. You'll be able to see very clearly where those funds are being applied, and it is exactly to those functions that you're concerned about. So we're presupposing when we come back on the 20th, I forget the exact approval schedule of the council. It's very close, or excuse me, of the board. It's very close to that date. I don't remember. It's just a little before or a little after, but the plan will be fully developed by then. Be happy to share that with you. So I think that should alleviate most of your concerns around that issue. So.
Yeah, that's helpful. I didn't understand. I want to just make sure, and I'm going to just say it, and then let me know if I'm misunderstanding it. So the change, the promoting of the 1 lieutenant to a new captain position, that is going to be 100% covered. I don't even know how to ask the right question. So the cost of that change, however you want to frame that change, lieutenant is now a captain, and then you've got 4 captains, but I think I'm hearing something proposed different. That cost is going to be 100% absorbed or taken care of with the existing positions that are being no longer used, right?
Yes, so what's going to happen, let me do it by a pretty simple way. There's two increases in cost, which is a sergeant to a lieutenant and a lieutenant to a captain. So there's about a $24,000 delta there of additional money. As I indicated early, the direction from the city manager is if you do that, you have to pay for that. So the chief has recommended eliminating a vacant senior clerk position that's about $61,000. So there's actually a reduction in the overall budget. There's a position going away, a senior clerk, and there's two positions moving up. The result is a captain, 4 lieutenants, and the same number of sergeants and police officers as there was before.
Okay, that's what I thought I understood originally. I just
Can I hit button on that? Because the problem with this format of the sort of treating the departments as distinct units from the city as a whole is this idea that in several of them it's no cost because it's offset by reductions inside the department. Essentially what that does is it strips from us our ability to budget. I don't know what those reductions are, so they're just unspecified. So I'm going to reclass a PC tech to application support specialist, and I'm going to cut something else in order to do that. Well, my job is to approve the additional spending, but it's also to figure out what are we cutting, and I can't tell that from this format of the document. And so when you just described the captain, lieutenant, sergeant shift, it says that here, no net cost because it's offset by departmental reductions, which as I now understand includes the line underneath that, which is the elimination of the senior clerk, right? But it's not clear whether that's the departmental reductions is the senior clerk thing or it's there's something else going on. It's just not. I mean the table should be showing us where the cuts are being made too, in order to support these augmentations to make sure that that's consistent with what what we're trying to achieve. And 99.9% of all these things always get approved. We just need to know what they are.
And I want to correct myself because I'm glad you raised that, Mayor, because that actually was an incorrect statement that I made. The $61,000 is a separate savings. The savings, the $24,000, is offset by those costs that the mayor has just appropriately commented are not clearly identified here. So when we come back in June, on the 20th of the budget, we will try to break down before you finally approve these in more detail what those adjustments were. I don't know them as they sit here today.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments? So you need our specific approval on the budget policy, and you're asking for concurrence on the adjustments in the conceptual
Correct.
terms. Now, we've had some discussion about specific items. Do you need us to concur with specific exceptions, or do you have sufficient direction? What level of concurrence do you need from us?
Yeah. I think the only thing that I have heard, and Toby may have heard something different, is that just to make sure we're going in the right direction is the question on the captain and the 3 lieutenants versus captain and 4 lieutenants. So that's, I think everything else, clearly we know that court enforcement needs to work. Otherwise, if it doesn't work, we'll be back here. Our goal is to make it work, and I think that's the only other thing that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's all I was going to mention.
And I was just going to supply a bit of background information to Bill's point here. If you can look at the Councilman Christoph mentioned the 3-in-1, there's actually not an increase in the direct oversight on the POA. The POA obviously does not like the thought of additional management oversight. If you look at the structure now, there's 4 lieutenants who have oversight over the operations of the department. Under the new structure, there would be a captain and 3 lieutenants. That's still 4 management positions that have oversight over the operations piece that the POA is concerned about. So there's no increase there. Well, the other lieutenant then is in a position that's currently a POA represented position that is separated out from the department, has no oversight responsibilities, no supervision responsibilities at all. It's set apart in administration, and what it does, it investigates those officers and complaints against officers. And so there's been some situations where there's been some, actual or perceived conflicts of interest of having a represented employee in that union investigating those very same people. And so what this does, it provides that separation, that objectivity, both a real and perceived separation. And so it does not increase the actual oversight of the POA, but addresses that issue where that person 1 week is sitting across the table from the office and the attorneys that represent the POA, and next week could possibly be being represented by those very same people if they were the ones that had some type of misconduct allegation. And so that's what we're doing. It's just, so there's no increase in oversight over the operation piece. It's just addressing that other issue that I described to you. So I hope that helps explain that just a little bit better.
Mr. Johannesson?
Chief, as long as you're up there, just briefly, I mean, there's an elimination of a senior clerk position, and I know we went through staff adjustments a while back. We had a number of folks had very emotional testimony about their leaving the force. What does this do in terms of your diminished capacity? What does this clerk do? Because I remember at that time, we had some clerks that were doing very essential functions at the lower level. So what's happening is you're eliminating some lower level function, you're increasing the higher level function, and I thought the need was more at the lower level function.
Actually, this position has been vacant for the entire fiscal year, and we have functioned very well without it. It's amazing what you can do when you find that, you know, by trying to be more effective, more efficient. And Phil was actually right. He corrected himself. That savings has nothing to do with the other piece. That other piece is all funded through monies that are already budgeted. They were approved. The other approved positions we already have. So that $61,000 just represents a savings to the general fund. And so it's just an efficiency. We've discovered we don't need that position, and it's not funding any of those other pieces that we just talked to you about.
Great, thanks.
All right. So the request is for approval of the budget policy in concurrence with the proposed adjustments.
And this authorization for the city manager to.
Oh, yes, sorry. And the additional authorization for the Acela automation software and installation, and the extension of the fourth limited term senior program manager.
Are you looking for a motion?
Sure.
I'll move, and there was one other note I had just in terms of clarifying some of when you come back in June.
Yes.
Is providing that, because that was a comment I was going to make as well, because it just was following along. So thank you for bringing that up. But I'll move the recommended action with the changes outlined by the mayor, the additional item by the mayor.
I guess I have a question on the motion. I mean, I still want to have something come back to us explaining the captain and 3 lieutenants versus captain and 4 lieutenants. So, unless I'm the only one that wants to have that happen.
I think that, yeah, I would.
This is not the final budget. The budget will come back to you.
Okay.
And I think we know we need to address that.
All right. Thank you.
Don't be shy to provide a spreadsheet for me, because I can get through that with notations.
Okay.
So, okay.
We'll improve the attachment detail.
Yep. So it's been moved.
Second.
And seconded. So no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. Council calendar. Ms. Richardson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is our last meeting of the month. We don't meet again until June. I did want to make one announcement that the city's video contest celebrating West Sacramento's 25th year is up and running on the city's website. And we have some great prizes, the grand prize being an iPad 2. If individuals want information on the video contest, they can go to the city's website and get that information.
All right, questions on the calendar? City manager's report?
I wanted to just bring one item to the council for quick discussion, and that is We have an opportunity to participate with the county on a grant application that would provide 3 years of funding, partial funding in essence, for a police officer, a prosecutor, and another support person. It's really a targeted program and intended to identify a neighborhood. We're thinking the neighborhood would be West Capitol Avenue and the area immediately approximate to that. You basically engage in a number of community programs, variety of efforts to drive down crime, drive down disorder, make certain that that area is good. The problem is it's like other programs that we've had in the past where we get most of the funding from someone else, but we have to pick up a share of that funding. It ends up that we get about 75% of the cost covered, but we have to come up with the 25%. I think it's a highly competitive program, so it's not at all clear that we would get this. But I wanted to get a sense from the council whether we should look at that possibility, or whether the fact that we will have, initially the first year it's entirely paid by others, but you know, as you go along, a bigger and bigger share has to be paid locally. And so I wanted to see what the sense of the council was on that. And overall, for the 3 years, it's about 75% from the grant and about 25% from the city.
It would have made the city attorney happier if you had asked us that during the budget.
Well, but this, well, no, this is just whether we should apply for a grant. It would have to come back to you.
I know, but if it's a future item that's going to come back to us and we haven't agendized it to give you too much feedback, and one person could say something.
Okay.
I like the idea.
All right.
I like the way Bill thinks.
All right. Good, especially in that location. That location needs some help.
Great, thank you.
All right, city attorney report.
Nothing to.
City staff direction for members of the council. We need to bring something in writing. I'm going to do it too. Okay. No staff direction for members of the council. Then, and we have no future agenda item requests at this stage. I'm going to ask that when the motion to adjourn is placed, that it be done so that we adjourn in the memory of 3 individuals. Mr. Ledesma has requested that we adjourn in the memory of Nancy Hatamia, the wife of Lana Hatamia, who served on the post-redevelopment options for West Sacramento Task Force, and a former State Secretary of Economic Development, a Yolo County resident, recently passed. And I would also ask that we do so in memory of Rusty Mendez, longtime member of the Parks and Community Services Commission, and also of the Cable Commission when we had one, and a very dedicated and spirited community activist. And then finally, Specialist Manuel Vasquez of our community, who died April 24th in Afghanistan, part of the 2nd Battalion and the 20th Infantry, as part of Operation Enduring Freedom, and a 22-year-old resident of our community who gave his life for his country. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Johannesson has moved. Second. Mr. Ledesma has moved that Mr. Ledesma seconded that we adjourn in memory of those 3 individuals. And seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. That motion carries and the meeting is adjourned.